What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and I'm here with Citizen Sleeve of the Last Edit podcast on YouTube. And we are doing a podcast right now, probably no video. You might see this on YouTube. I might just upload the audio for this. But we decided to sit down and talk about if it would be possible now to make a truly evil superhero game, especially after we've seen some of these superhero TV shows. You've got Umbrella Academy. You've now got The Boys. Sleeve reminded me prior to the podcast, you've got Preacher and a couple others. So we're going to dive into this and dive into some of the things we think would be different currently than maybe some of the past titles like Prototype or Infinite. Also, you can check him out at the Last Edit Pod, which is their Twitter. They've got a YouTube channel. It doesn't have a custom URL yet because they're not big enough, but if you get a chance, check out his Twitter. Got a link to his YouTube. They do movie reviews about once or twice a week. Once a week for sure. Do you guys sometimes do twice a week?
Yeah, we're getting there. So we're starting to do kind of separate podcasts now for TV shows and for particular topics. We've got one coming up soon, which is about casting in Hollywood. After all the stuff that's come out with the Little Mermaid casting, stuff like that.
Yeah, which is funny because you guys said that, and I was in Discord, and I'm like, dude, we just covered that in our...
we did it at the same time. Even recorded at the same time.
Yeah, that was insanity. Anyway, if you guys get a chance, check that out. And as always, you can become a patron on the Patreon website. All this is going to be in the description. I would love for you guys to go there. If you haven't subscribed on these audio channels, I would suggest you do so. Some of the Walking the Walk style stuff will be podcasts. They probably will also be uploaded to video, but who knows? So what we're going to talk about and why this all came up, because we both watched The Boys. And this is something I've talked about in the podcast tons of times, probably started around the original time the Arrow TV show started. I was like, I want an evil superhero game. And Infamous and Prototype are fairly binary, which we're going to talk about. But we're going to break down a little bit about The Boys. Now, of course, this is going to be spoiler territory. So if you're this far, I'll warn you, to talk about what we're going to talk about, we have to talk about the TV shows. So I'm going to list a couple of the shows we'll be talking about. If you haven't watched them all the way through, I would pause this and watch them and then come back. So we're going to be talking about Arrow up until about season 5, which is where I am. Umbrella Academy, all of it. Preacher, some of it. I think Sleeve has seen all of it, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, we're going to be talking about Brightburn a bit. We probably won't go too deep into Brightburn since I think it still might even be out in theaters. But we are going to be talking about The Boys in particular. So just a heads up, we'll consider this right now your spoiler warning. So let's go through the actors real quick. I always like to do this. I did it for Stranger Things. Also, if you're wondering where the Stranger Things podcast is, it should be uploaded today as well for the next episode. So you've got Carl Urban as Billy Butcher. You've got Jack, I think it's Jack Quaid as Huey. You have Antonio Starr as Homelander. You have Aaron, and did you know that Antonio Starr is the guy from Banshee?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, go check out Banshee. He's got in that one, he's jet black hair, but it was so crazy to see him with that bleach blonde, Homelander hair.
Yeah.
Antonio Starr as Homelander, as I said. Aaron Moriarty as Starlight. Dominique Milligot or something along those lines as Queen
McKelligot. Yeah.
McKelligot. Thank you. You've got Jesse Usher as A-Train. Chase Crawford as the Deep. Tomer Capone as Frenchie, Karen Fukuhara as the female. If anybody knows, she's Kamiko. For whatever reason, on Internet Movie Database, they have her as the female. Just so you guys know, if you guys want to see an amazing martial artist, she is a multi-championship martial artist. You should go check her out. She's got some incredible stuff on YouTube. Nathan Mitchell as Black Noir. Elizabeth Shue as Madeline Stillwell. Laz Alonso as Mother's Milk. Jennifer Esposito as Susan Rayner. Simon Pegg as Hugh's dad, which him with an American accent threw me the entire show. And ending that is Translucent. Alex Hassell as Translucent. So first I want to just ask Sleeve, what'd you think about The Boys overall?
I really liked it. Really, really liked it. I said on Twitter just after I'd finished it, because I finished it probably a day before you or something.
Yeah.
It doesn't just subvert the genre expectations, which you get all the bloody time now, playing with that subversion of what might happen. It just outright breaks it. It breaks the conventions of that genre by just sticking a middle finger up, being as violent as it wants, being as, just full out brutal. And it doesn't just play with that idea of superheroes as being corrupt and being after the big bucks and being involved in industries and trying to be underhanded and all this stuff. it downright shows them being horrific to human beings. Absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
I mean, the plane thing near the end, we'll come to that, but wow, man.
Yeah.
Now, we talked about the ending, it doesn't end the way we wanted it to, perhaps. Doesn't end particularly strongly, but almost everything prior to that is really, really well done.
Yeah, for sure. And if everybody hears a pop in their audio, it's me changing out my recording format for one that if this crashes, we will still have footage. So give me 1 second. So, long story short, when it comes to The Boys, I think it did subvert. And I also think not only did The Boys show that you don't have to have a good ending, and I don't mean the part that we didn't like, but I mean a redemption ending. In fact, this is the ultimate of unredeemable endings, which we'll talk about. I brought it up to Sleeve that one of the things that caused me to really want to do this podcast is because I personally believe the ending, not the part we didn't like, but right prior to that was ruthless. And I would like to see games do that. And we have seen some. We discussed and looked at Infamous Prototype. Prototype allows you to basically at the end sort of decide good or bad. But I've always felt that those are really binary. I think we talked about this. You've got sort of a vampire system of like, do you save the guy or do you not? And there's no real flexibility. And what we're going to talk about today is a truly flexible superhero game that we would like to see where you are bad guys. And of course you could still do good stuff. We'll talk about that. But the first thing to talk about with The Boys is the antagonists and protagonists. So in a lot of games you'll have, especially with superhero games, you have like Batman as a protagonist and you might have 2 or 3 people helping him. You have the police force, even though there might be a couple corrupt ones depending on the game. And you'll have Gordon, and you have Batgirl later, Gordon's daughter in the Batman games. I can't remember, Barbara. Yeah. And that's pretty much it. Well, you've got Alfred, but those are I think, the expected characters. What I found really interesting about The Boys is not only were there a ton of protagonists, also depending on viewpoint, those protagonists switched multiple fucking times, which most games, other than the one hinge switch, which they might do, I'm a bad guy, and you thought I was a good guy. This show did a ton. And so I wrote down some of the protagonists. Depending on what you believe, the boys are protagonists, obviously. I also want to talk a little bit about the humans themselves in the story, because I think some of the humans are protagonists and antagonists. And what I mean by that is social media. Because this show, if you step back and look at the show, replace all the superheroes with YouTuber influencers. And you have the exact same situation going on, where people, the crusty lower end of those influencers are trying really hard. The upper tier ones, everybody thinks are perfect. And occasionally you get that weird story. And that's what the AA meeting was about. And if people don't realize what that was, I call it an AA meeting. I don't know what else you would call it. But you get all of these people who've been hurt by the superheroes. One was saved, her spine was broken because she was saved too violently. One guy had sex with a superhero and lost his Peter because she had a climax and froze.
That's hilarious.
It's hilarious. The entire story is a crux on this in particular situation because Huey's girlfriend is destroyed by a superhero on accident. And
that's the moment for me when it clicked.
Right.
Like, first episode, you're watching it through, you're kind of looking at it and thinking, okay, this feels a bit different, this feels a bit unusual. And that moment when A-Train just goes, and boom, his girlfriend just blows apart. Yeah, that's when it really clicked. And I went, yeah, this could be something different.
Yeah, and so there's all these protagonists, but you also have the CIA, you have the FBI, you have the DOD at different times, all being good guys. You have the military contractors mostly being bad, occasionally being good. We'll talk about that in a bit. And you also, in a way, have the main 7 being good because they are still saving some people, even though many of them are set up. There's still people being saved. For example, what's her name? Torchlight? The main Starlight. Starlight, in particular, when she enters the 7, states very fluently that she would rather do her own saving because she has been doing that in her hometown. Yeah. So she's a fairly powerful, we'll call her at that time B-level superhero. She's actually a fairly high-level superhero, still being a protagonist, still has the gossamer sheen of everything's cool and the 7 is where I want to be, and she's out there trying to save people, and we do find that going on. And then when you look at how the street-level protagonists, one of the things they show is this map. And I think they say 250. I could be wrong, but I think they say 250 superheroes are out there. Yeah. And those guys, we get the opinion at least that those guys are doing the grind, right? That's the opinion I took from that, was that those guys are trying really hard. You get the B-level influencers signing autographs. I love that. Haley Joel Osment.
And you got like Shockwave is like the what's he called? Yeah, Shockwave is the equivalent to A-Train, but he's like the sub-level version.
Yeah.
And then Haley Joel Osment plays the what's his name?
Mesmer.
Yeah. He's really just to see him was really cool as well.
Yeah, was really cool. And you've got these people who have their own lives, their own problems. But I would say that there's more protagonists and crisscrossing than we ever get in a game. Makes sense.
Well, it's all grey, isn't it?
It is all grey. It is all grey.
Every character's grey.
It is all grey.
I mean, even Huey, this guy, his girlfriend gets blitzed. He's trying to fight the system because these superheroes exist in a world where they have these lawsuits where they can get away with almost any crap they want because they're so powerful. And then he starts murdering people or murdering superheroes and all this stuff.
Well, not only that, before we move to the antagonists, every person in here is a protagonist and antagonist at some time, or at least most of the time.
Yeah,
this is why I want to talk about this when we jump into the game part. But when you look at the boys, Huey starts out as a fairly mild-mannered Radio Shack employee, or whatever they're going to call the tech store employee, but that's our version of Radio Shack. He has no backbone or very little. Even his girlfriend is like, I'd ask you out. And you get this idea that they complete each other fairly well. And I really like that when his changeover, and then you hear Billy Butcher in the third episode say, look at you, man. When we started this, look at what you were and look at what you are now. Billy Butcher is not a good guy, technically. Technically, he's not really a good guy, but he ends up changing, I would say, Hugh, not for the better because Hugh's killing people, but, well, he's killing bad superheroes. But he does give him the backbone that I think Huey wasn't a complete person. Right?
No, he was spineless before then. His dad, Simon Pegg, keeps on saying it.
Remember, his own dad says you don't have the fight in you.
Yeah, just sign that check and get the money.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
You haven't got the fight. You've never had the fight, Huey.
Yeah, and he's like, I love you, but and his dad does love him. Simon Pegg does a very good job as being subdued and not Simon Pegg. As everybody knows, I am not the biggest Simon Pegg fan. I don't know why, but I think his supporting. And did you guys, I don't know if you're aware, Huey is based on Simon Pegg. Did you know that?
Yeah.
In the comics, they drew him as, and Simon Pegg, I guess, turned it down and said, I'm too old to play Huey, so you're going to have to get somebody else. So he took the father role.
Well, they must have got it from Spaced, and but I would say particularly the series Spaced, and then probably a little bit of Shaun of the Dead, because that's what he is.
Yeah, sort of the goofy, nerdy...
mild-mannered, a bit spineless, and then he overcomes that.
Reserve,
quite similar.
In a reserve of like power that a person has that needs something to unlock it. So those are just some of the protagonists. I'm sure I'm missing some, but let's go to the antagonists, which is almost the exact same thing. You've got the government, which is wishy-washy, very much supportive of investigating the superheroes, but then at the end of the series, completely fucks over. And I would say causes the ending. Because if they had not fucked over Billy Butcher and the boys, I don't know if we would have had the ending that we had. And it was really surprising to me because I don't know if you remember, he agrees to not go after what's his name? Headlander.
Headlander, yeah.
Homelander,
sorry.
Homelander. Do you know why I call it Headlander? Because of the game by Double Fine.
Yeah.
and so anyway, he agrees to not go after Homelander. Now you get the idea he will, but he still agrees that he won't. And then the government, who's been backing him all this time, Jennifer Esposito's been backing him. He's had a relationship with her. Yeah. He's been kicked out of the government. He negotiates a deal to turn the boys legit. Like they're going to get their own office. And she agrees. She's like, you, and they're panicking, and instead they completely fuck him over. But you also have the superheroes and as antagonists. I think we all agree with that.
And Starlight's kind of our way in because she's the one that scratches the veneer away.
Yeah, and none of these characters are always an antagonist. Even the Deep, who is fairly reprehensible to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking in the social justice kind of fairly. He's just... If we were 10 years ago and that guy was around me, I'd still be like, dude, You're a fucking CW like actor model. Like I'd want to punch him. I just don't like him. They did a great job with him. He was a fantastic character. I would also say one of the antagonists in this show is something that a lot of games do well that TV shows don't in portraying, which is just secrets. Secrets on top of secrets. And what I mean by that is they're not active antagonists. They're not a person. But if you notice with a lot of shitty TV shows, two people will get in a fight because they decide not to tell each other one fucking thing. And you're watching the show going, listen, dickhead, turn around and say this one thing. Nobody's going to die. You know, everything will be fine. But every 90210, every Vampire Diaries, every Arrow, every Flash is always based on some stupid secret. Except for the Flash. He tells everybody he's the Flash. Like, that's sort of weird, but
straight up, yeah.
Yeah. And then I think another antagonist is the weakness of the characters themselves, what they are internally. The weakness of Homelander having, I would say, no conscience at all. His conscience is almost imprinted on him as the superhero part to be a good guy. But that's it. All he cares about is the outward appearance, not what he's actually doing.
That's just a perception that's been created by this company, and by him himself.
And he believes in holding it. That's the crazy thing. And until the end, when he turns into a messiah, or tries to, for the most part, he does hold up to that. And he does take out some bad guys, but you find out some shit's happened. But there's a lot of antagonists. There's also the government we talked about. There's social media. I think social media is one of the biggest antagonists in this show because you start to get the idea that everything they do is based on that. Remember, Starlight does something, they're like, your likes are up. And you're just like, oh, shit, man.
Yeah, like the team comes in and they're like, right, because you've done this and this has happened, so we're going to change your character to this. We want you to wear this costume. And she's like, no, I'm not wearing that. It's like, yeah, you will, because you're a brand. You're all brands, and that's what they keep saying.
And that's when you realize there's two masterminds in this. There's Elizabeth Shue as Stillwell, and she is a cold-hearted son of a bitch with no reason. Even up at the end of the show, there's no actual reason for her to be the way she is. With Homelander, I think there is in a way, because we find out that they were basically humans given superhero powers as babies by being injected with this shit. And so he's been raised in a certain way and without any moral compass, without any mother. Remember, you find out the scientist says without mothers, we always seem to have the kids turn out shitty every time. And you find out that Homelander has a mother fetish for Elizabeth Shue. Obviously, I think you can figure that out. And there's a relationship there. So there's just multiple antagonists. And we get that in a lot of superhero games where you have the multiple antagonist bad guys. But I like the softer antagonists, which aren't just the bad guys, but Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think, tried to do this, where you had to go around town and save people, and if you didn't, your likes would go down. People would start to think you're a bad guy. It played out horribly, but I like the idea overall, and that was somebody trying to get social media. So jumping into the game part, we were talking about like what exactly were we looking for, and I'll read my two ideas and then see if Sleeve has any. So I had two ideas for a bad guy, and when I talk about bad guy, we're going to get into this, why it would truly be bad, but a bad guy superhero. And I would say either a story about bad characters building themselves up, and as they do, good guys or heroes come to fight them. So you would be like a villain, you would be doing payday-like missions, you would be doing all that kind of stuff, and as you leveled up, as your renown, as your infamy raised, good superheroes would continually come at you, and they would be your boss battles. And they would be, you could choose if they were fairly illustrious good guys or if they were corruptible the same. Because I was thinking to my head, do you know what would be amazing? If you had a bad guy show up and you were able to somehow get the boss battle to not occur because you were able to talk him into joining you. But we'll talk about that. I just think that would subvert everything people expect in a superhero game. The next would be a title that hinges on what's happening in games lately, which is characters with flaws. And you are the actual hero. And whether you be psychotic like Trevor in GTA, which I think a lot of people embrace Trevor. I don't think Trevor kills somebody in the first I think the first fucking time you see him in GTA 5, he stomps somebody's head in. You have that as well. And then you have the idea that could you be superheroes where your entire job was to be like the Seven overall. And exactly how you would go about that. Is there any other ways you could do a super villain style game?
It's interesting. I mean, you look at the open world games we've got now. I mean, we've talked about the two obvious ones that tried to do this with Prototype and Prototype 2 and the Infamous games. And part of the problem is that you give players kind of a grey area, but that grey area doesn't really exist in these games because it's so binary, which we've mentioned. You either choose the good thing, you choose the bad thing. So there's nothing in between. And I think part of the problem with games is that you need to try and establish a villain who has a thought process that can be believed in. Any good villains in any superhero stuff, any sci-fi stuff, whatever it is, if they have a mindset of belief that the audience can kind of semi-believe why they're doing it, that's the important part. Because otherwise you end up with like Steppenwolf in the most recent crappy DC movie, with no motivation at all really, but I want to kill you. But with a game, I would just want to. You've got to try and have. You would need choice. I think that would which you just mentioned. You would need choice so that you could have a character who could manipulate other characters, who could try and push them in the direction they wanted them to go. I think an open world will work better for this type of game. I think if you tried to do it in a linear sense, you would have to be very locked into the way the game developer wanted that character to go. Yeah, I mean, it's just we don't see it a lot, do we? I mean, Dungeon Keeper, maybe, in a very playful way, he plays as the bad guy, but it's not much out there that does this.
I think the easiest way to start... So, first of all, I'll say, when I'm thinking of these games, I'm certainly thinking of a Batman-style game. Open City.
Yeah,
yeah. I will say, I personally believe that you need a Genesis moment at the starting, and I've thought about this. I thought about it all last night when Sleeve and I were... Because originally I was going to do this by myself, and I had forgotten Sleeve had watched it, and I know he knows movies, and he's been a game developer. So it's like, might as well. Which I forgot to mention. It was actually a big title. I'm like, mention he's developed games before. So I ignored the one thing that matters. But here's what I would love to have seen, or love to see in a game. Imagine the starting cutscene, and you're a young child with superpowers of some kind, or whatever. And the superhero shows up and does end up killing somebody to save somebody else. And you see that. And you see behind the veneer. You see, for example, we all know Bruce Wayne's a cockchugger. I mean, he's a jackass. He's a terrible person. And he's got one thing. His parents died. And we all joke about it. We're like, listen, multiple people's parents die and they don't become a fucking vigilante, right?
Well, yeah, and we've seen it done 25 different times now. So
yeah, but if you break it down and look at what type of game you would want, whether you're humans trying to subvert the heroes or you're who are basically villains, or you're a superhero yourself, I just think the starting would have to be something poignant. Like, for example, I don't know if you remember, but they mentioned that Torchbearer, what was his name? The other hero, the one that was in charge, but he had retired right at the starting of The Boys. Shoot.
I'm just looking at the list now.
I didn't write it down because
it's not on the list because he's not in it. Obviously.
But
idea.
You know who I'm talking about. I think it's like Torch something.
Well, I think it's Torchlight, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he has one moment where somebody mentions he burned a family. He destroyed a family. The black guy Mother's Milk mentions that.
Yeah, and it becomes all hush hush.
And they keep mentioning Mallory. And it will be like Mallory. It'll be like Mallory. And they mention that multiple times. I would love the starting of a show to be like, what if he comes in and his decision is fairly black and white and a character sees that? Like, he comes in and you realize he could save everybody, but instead he takes the easy way out. The superhero takes the easy way out. Like, he just torches the entire building without saving people. Something Homelander does when he basically gets on that plane and just talks her down from saving everybody. Scene. He's like, I'm not going to fly 123 times. What if I try to hold up the plane? I'll punch through all these weird, which makes sense, right? Because the superstructure of a plane actually wouldn't allow for what we see in Superman, where they grab the aileron and, he holds up the entire plane. That shit'd snap off.
The weird calmness he's got as well. He's perfectly happy. There's no emotion.
He's clinical, right? At that point, he's clinical, which I think is what's the scariest about him, is he can be clinical and then he can be completely emotional, but still appear to be clinical. You never quite know where he's going. But for a game, I think a genesis point would be a young child. And, you could do the parents dying, but I think it would be cooler if it was pretty harsh. Like something where he sees, like, maybe not just his parents, but for example, a subway. Terrorists on a subway train is heading towards a stop. It's going to smash. he shows up and maybe the guy just gives up and says, fuck this, kills the, terrorist, blows up the, train, kills a bunch of people.
Yeah.
And then the kid, is growing up, continually knowing the secret. And, he's getting
You
beat
need
up.
that change in worldview, you're right.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, there's no way you can establish why the character would see the world in that way.
Yeah, and imagine him getting beat up in school for talking bad about superheroes.
Yeah.
Like he's being put down.
Some films touch upon it, don't they? I mean,
they do.
Very, very gently. Like, imagine that kid you're talking about watching the end of Man of Steel, so basically watching Superman murder Zod.
Right.
Or maybe watch, like, Scarlet Witch in Winter Soldier, when she has to throw that thing and blows up that tower. If you're watching that as a kid from the inside out, but it never goes further than that. But if you did it like that, you had that moment, that would work really, really well. Brightburn's basically that, isn't it, the film?
It is, except I think he's evil. I think he's more like Homelander, isn't he, in Brightburn? He's got that evil seed versus seeing something that causes him to be...
It's just the way the world treats him and reacts to what he can do, and then obviously he's got that thing which is calling him all the time. The ship that he's landed in.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, is it would depend on the game. If you're normal people or a lower level superhero trying to subvert the people aren't good, then your genesis would be one thing. But if you're a superhero in that group trying to be evil, so let's say the game is your Homelander, then you have a different thought process, and you still have to have a genesis for the superhero, which I think that would be even more difficult, trying to find a genesis for the leader of, or even if you're one of the seven. Let's say you just get hired into the seven, they know you're not a great guy, what have you, or maybe you get to choose, do you back them up? Because Torchlight, she backs him up at times and then doesn't at other times. She vacillates quite heavily between how she's going to treat them and what she's going to do. I mean, she gives a blowjob to get in. Starlight, I'm sorry. She gives a blowjob to get in. And then Queen Mauve basically says, don't ever fucking let him see a sweat, that kind of comment.
Suck it up, basically.
And then later says, I was wrong, don't be me. Don't be the cold, callous bitch who's been here too long. Be your whiny, perfect, sniveling self.
Yeah, she's a really interesting character.
She's very interesting.
The way she becomes more and more and more conflicted over the course of the episodes.
And Homelander basically controlling her through the entire show, basically saying, I couldn't bear to let you live if you found somebody else. So you realize he wants to bang Elizabeth Shue, and does at the end. He wants to do all the shit he wants to do. He rapes or sleeps with Butcher's wife, and he's doing all this other shit, but he's a child with a mommy fetish, which is very realistic. He has to control all the people in his life, and he controls her and says, even though I'm doing all this other shit and banging everybody else, you cannot bang anybody. So she's alone. She is distinctly alone, which I think that's why she's interesting to me.
Do you know, as a game, it would be really, really difficult, I think, to take any of those seven really and create a game around them. I think the other way that you considered it, whereas you would play one of the boys,
trying to
like a recruit for the boys, trying to stop really horrible superheroes, but in a really nasty way yourself. But then you're taken away from what we're trying to discuss, which is a pure supervillain game.
Well, take away the seven for a second,
because it's that moral ambiguity again, isn't it?
Yeah, you
need more than that.
Take away the seven for a second. And let's just look at what if we wanted to create a Joker the movie style game. So in Payday, I was telling you prior to the podcast, I play a lot of Payday. And in Payday, you're hired to basically go shoot up a bunch of cops and steal money from armed cars, that kind of stuff, right? You're going in, you're busting into a bank, you're shooting cops. You're fairly unredeemable. I don't think there's much redeemable about that. How would you get, let's brainstorm this. How would you get a superhero, start the game as a mid-tier superhero, and let's say the game, I think what matters in the game is what your goal would be. And I would say the goal is to be utterly the most powerful person in the city. Maybe there's some other superheroes as well. How would you give him a genesis that would make sense? How would you...
Sandman.
What's the Sandman? I mean, I know what the Sandman is. What's his genesis that would make sense as this subversive leader?
Okay, so you would have to alter it a little bit, but Sandman is created because his daughter is really, really ill, and he needs money to save her. And so he robs a bank, I think, and then he's on the run, something like that. Spider-Man 3 is not a good film.
And
I
then
don't
falls
recommend
into the sand chemical pit,
falls into
right?
the sand. That thing happens where he becomes Sandman, and then it's basically he has this sense of morality because he's trying to help his daughter, but everything he does because of that ends up being mostly bad. So you could have that moment where you have that start, and then you could reverse what we normally see in a video game. So in the latest Spider-Man, I think there's a bit where you fight Scorpion and he's in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
So why aren't you then Sandman? You're the one in the bank stealing the money, and you have to fight off whichever superhero is trying to stop you. Something like that.
Do you think a game then hinges on... So people love Trevor in GTA, and I would say that there was no reason for Trevor to be the way he was. Probably comical is why it sold. Because it's a comical homicidal. So would you say then, if you were going to build a superhero villain game, you would have to give them an emotional crux? Because I'm trying to get away from that and see if it's possible.
Well, this is the problem. This is the problem, I think. You would have to make the opening as harsh as the opening as The Boys.
That's exactly what I'm thinking.
You would have to have something like that, where a literal superhero murdered one of your family or your friends or something in front of your eyes. And then you become a superhero in some way because of that.
Yeah.
I don't think it'd work any other way.
How about this? What if your genesis was the ending of that superhero? So let's say you're a young kid, terrorism act happens, this guy comes and kills. What if the starting of the game is almost like the TV show, the movies where they do the flashing of Marvel comics? They're doing little brief snippets, and it shows you getting older. It shows you getting beat up at school for talking bad about him. It shows you finding out that you have a power when you're a teen, whatever that may be. It shows you maybe a couple brutal moments where you realize you're an outsider in some way. And maybe, depending on the way the story wants to go, you either start to get people to believe you, or you're by yourself and you start basically, robbing criminals, that kind of thing. Like you start out that way to get your money. And your entire desire is to learn how to trap this main superhero. And the starting of the game is maybe you on your rise to power. And the very starting of the game is you killing that superhero. And he doesn't have to be a high-level superhero. He could be a B-level superhero, like that Torch guy, and you kill him, and that's the starting of the game, where you kill him, and now you are on your way up, and then you get to decide from there, how you want to run the world. Because in Infamous, you go around and you can either suck people to get their power, you can kill them, you can save them. I think that's fine, but that is the homicidal villain, which I think for most of us, isn't as enjoyable. Because, for example, the Joker, one of his powers was that he spoke to the common person many times. Remember how he did fuck him over a lot of times too, but there were times where he would give out money. It was always this wishy-washy shit, right? You never quite knew where he was coming from. And I think with a super villain, you would have to give him a really harsh entrance, like you said. It would have to be redonkulous. It would have to be so harsh that you would be able to explain the beginning cutscene of him killing.
Well, take like Spider-Man then, and the opening there, the obvious one. So Uncle Ben is killed, obviously, and then he tries to find the killer. He drops out the window. Just replace him with a superhero. Literally have a superhero murder Uncle Ben. Maybe a robbery's happened, or maybe he gets in the way, or you'd have to find a really brutal way to kill that really important person.
The guy shows up and lights them both on fire instead of just
instead of just the collateral damage.
And the
thing.
kid has
and
to
then
see
you have that reason.
his dad or a mom or whatever burned to death. Yeah, you would have to do it really hard. And this does sound harsh for anybody wondering. This would not be a fucking G-rated game we're talking about. We're talking about something.
No.
Only a couple devs would do, and we're actually going to talk about that in a bit too. And I think you could get away with it. What we're trying to do is sort of set the stage of how you would be able to. I think the redemption arc, or lack of it in Boys, is what I like so much. Now, you only find out at the end there's no redemption, which you could do in the game too. For example, you could have, depending on if you did a superhero, or depending on if you see Torch, what's her name? I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Starlight, see? The torch thing, I should have never mentioned it. Starlight has a redemption arc, and I think it's fairly solid. It's not even really redemption for her, but it's awakening of what she's doing. And she sort of chooses the right way. But Billy Butcher, let's just go. We told people there were going to be spoilers. So Billy Butcher kills a child. He kills a baby.
Yeah.
And he kills a baby ruthlessly. He blows it up, knowing that in no way, shape, or form will it harm Homelander. He does it simply because he hates Elizabeth Shue's character, who is dark as fuck. She's just a piece of jerky for a soul.
Yeah,
and he kills her, kills the baby, and then Homelander, of course, saves him and shows that his wife either left him or is in hiding because Homelander threatened her. I don't think we really understand at the end what exactly is going on there.
Yeah, it's left to be a bit ambiguous, I think.
Did you take it as she had actually slept with Homelander and then went to raise the child, or did you take it as she had probably been maybe forcibly threatened, sat for 3 hours in that park, and had been threatened by Homelander that I'll kill your husband, blah, 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 and so she ended up in hiding because she seemed quite surprised when she saw Homelander. It wasn't like they were living the perfect life, and Homelander never goes there. What did you take from that?
I thought it was more the latter that you just described. I think it was more that she'd been placed into hiding, and it was for this forced situation because his character exudes that
menace,
Homelander
menace.
And by that point, you kind of think, yeah, he's probably forced himself on her in some weird way. But then it's so ambiguous that you still don't quite know. So start of next season, I reckon we'll find out a bit more about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and now that kid, does that kid now, if he's got the Homelander powers and he starts going off in that wrong direction, that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, and so the kid ages at a normal age. So that's another thing we don't know is a true story or not. So originally,
exactly,
the reason why the stories got fucked up is because Elizabeth Shue's character says miscarriage. And then Homelander goes and talks to the scientist, and the scientist says dead, the baby advanced at a high speed and died. So Homelander himself is surprised, which to me indicates that the girl is not in hiding because Homelander threatened her. Because Homelander seems just as surprised to find out all this stuff as everybody else.
I just think he didn't know.
Yeah,
he caused the situation years ago, but just didn't know.
So she realizes she's pregnant with this kid who does not advance at a high speed in her womb, which was the original story, but instead looks to be the proper age. He looks to be the 8 years old or whatever, because Billy says it was 8 years, right? Was it 6 years or 8 years? It was 8.
I think it was 8.
So you've got this child who shows up. You've got her in what appears to be hiding. She waits for 3 hours in the park, tries to figure out what to do, realizes either she doesn't, I don't think she did it I don't think she slept with Homelander freely, is what I'm saying. Because
exactly, yeah.
If she had, perhaps Homelander would have known where she lived. He didn't know any of that. Most likely Elizabeth Shue's character hid her. Because, or the FBI did, or somebody did, because they all had footage. Remember, the FBI lady who gets Billy Butcher to join had footage of her leaving the room. And some people were saying she didn't look like she had been raped. But I was like, when you watch that, correct. But a lot of people don't realize that if you talk to rape victims, it depends on the reaction. Some people will be in shock, which is what she looked like she was in, where she like fumbles around, tries to put her, like what just happened, that kind of stuff, and we don't.
Yeah,
really
it
know.
looked like that wave of that horrific memory had kind of come back to her.
Yeah. So with a superhero game, I would not encourage a rape scene at the starting. I think.
Well, this is something we've talked about, isn't it? Games against film and TV, anything to do with sex, even in a positive way, is so difficult to get right in a game, and developers are scared of it. Really scared of it.
And yet,
just look at the controversy of Mass Effect.
And yet, it's a main driver of most TV shows.
Yeah,
one of the most egregious things you can do is certainly kill a family member, but it certainly is also rape. It's certain, there's certain things that are egregious.
Yeah, and sexual abuse and things like that. I mean, it's touched upon in stuff like Detroit, but only in the sense that
Yeah, true.
Like, is it Kara? I think
Yeah.
she's the
She's the
servant.
female servant. Yeah.
The way she's treated in the store, the way she's treated at home by the father, but then you find out more about that abuse, and of
Yeah.
course it's because she's a cyborg as well. It's not because she's just a woman or a human being or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that Genesis would be the most important thing. If you have these two types of superhero game, you'd have to really nail it hard. But let's say we figure that out. And first we'll just discuss the type of game where you were a supervillain sort of on top of the world and trying to take over the world. I was trying to figure out what mission style would you have. And I think the best bet would be to not have him be the most powerful superhero.
Lex Luthor. I've just popped into my head now. If you could
see, I find him super powerful though. See,
he's still only a human. It's only the resources that he's got. He's got the suit. But he's still.
How would you put together missions? Or are you just saying a superhero style of Lex Luthor? Because, for example, what would your missions be, depending on your superhero level?
If you had him if you had literally Lex Luthor in that context, and you was trying to stop Superman
as the character. Is this what we're talking about?
As the character himself, okay. Yeah. So we could alter. I mean, there's plenty of origin stories of Lex Luthor in the comics. You could have a really violent, horrific one in which Superman kills his father, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then, rather than have it, you could have him have the power suit that he's got, so he could actually fight.
True, so he could fight. Right.
But then also mission types, you could have him trying to find kryptonite in certain locations
trying to find
across
suit
the world.
Parts or technology.
Yeah, you could have him trying to find Superman's home, and find his secrets and just things that connect, but then other superheroes as well. So you could try and do something like that. But the problem with that is, do you end up becoming silly like Saints Row? Because in my mind now, that's how I'd envisage a game developer thinking about doing this. They would just make it really silly, wouldn't they? So you'd be really evil, but it'd be over the top.
I personally believe it would be better if you didn't have a lot of resources, and this is why it would stop it from being silly. You have a perfect idea about you're trying to find the bad guy's home. You're trying to find a weakness. What if your entire mission base, Sleeve, was finding people who had been wronged by superheroes who may know something? So what if you go out there and one of your missions is to help this guy rob a bank to get money to pay for something he needs, but by doing so, he'll tell you about an experience he had with a superhero where he may know a weakness the superhero has. Or he may have seen something, or maybe in the stories he's the only person who's ever caused a wound on the superhero, but no one's ever been able to find out what it was. And he's like, I'll tell you if you do this. And so
that's interesting.
By the desire to get to a certain thing, you're doing more evil things. These are not going to be good guys. They're not, or at least obscure. Some will be gray, some will be black. Maybe a couple will be an all-white type of story. But the reason why I was saying I would want him a little mid-tier is because my belief is if you're too high, the main bad guy would know what you're doing right away. And you would have your exact worry, which is that you would have Saints Row, you leaping from building to building. To me, it would be cooler if you were trying to subvert. So imagine one of your missions is knowing that the good guys are looking for somebody, and your job is to get that guy out of the city. Like those kind of things. So...
Oh, it's like the guy from Civil War. Oh crap, what's his name? The Russian guy, he's a human.
Yeah.
His family's killed by Winter Soldier. Oh no, part of his family's killed by some of the
and he turns
them against each other.
Yeah. And so that's where I believe there could be a lot of play that we've never seen in missions before. Missions where somebody's like, the main superhero who is bad is looking for this guy and he's in hiding. And you find out through your connections, maybe doing mini missions for them, whatever, that you know where he is. So you go to him and he's like, listen, if you get me out of town, maybe the police are after you because of course the police will believe the main superhero, not you. If you get past him, if you get me out of here, you get me this thing for me to escape, I will give you some data that you need about building a suit, perhaps, to fight the main bad guy, or about a particular flaw he may have.
Oh, I'll tell you what you could do then. I mean, we've both just seen Far From Home, the new Spider-Man film. Mysterio, he's got this whole team of people. So what you could do is you could have a hub. But
exactly.
Like State of Decay, for Christ's sake, where you've got a
where they all have their own
department,
reasons to be there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And they all fundamentally support you and your development as a
Yeah,
super villain or whatever.
yeah.
That would work really, really well because then you could have different departments that are researching different
And
things that
remember,
all
he
feed
says
together.
Mysterio gives the speech on the bar, and he's like, and Bob over here, who had this and this happen to him,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
got fired, and blah blah blah. Thanks, Bob, for making this. And so you get this idea that all these people believe, and that's what I mean. Imagine games where that's you're collecting human resource, like people who, and you can do it both ways. This also depends on if you're the bad guy or if you're trying to subvert the heroes that are bad. That's where the game changes, because
yeah, yeah.
if you're trying to subvert good guys that everybody knows or that you know is actually evil, that would go a certain way. And then if you are fully evil, that would go another way. You could still do this same kind of thing, get people to believe in you. But that's another thing. You know, you could have a situation where you're doing a good mission by saving somebody, even though you're a piece of shit and you don't want to save them. The only reason you're saving them is because the guy who is connected to them is somebody that you want something from them.
Yeah, or even in the world recognizing you. So you could have newspaper articles or radio, podcasts and stuff that change depending on how you tackle certain missions in the world, and then the perception of you within that world.
Yeah.
People cowering, at the streets because you've done something reprehensible,
Right.
as opposed to you actually have pretended to be good, and so they all think you're great. That would work really, really well.
And then you have these karma systems. So we've talked about this. You have Prototype, and you have Infamous, and you have most superhero games where you have some kind of karma system. Except for Batman, who can run somebody over with a tank and nobody gives a shit. But my personal opinion would be, I would love it if you could subvert the karma system. So, for example, karma, let's say people are against you. What if one of your missions was to get somebody who runs television broadcasts and you help them out, or you threaten them and they start running stories that make you appear better than you are? So your karma's going up, but it's like this fake karma. So you can either do good, you can do stuff that it may look good. It doesn't have to be good. But imagine setting up your own crimes. Imagine hiring people to go. So in a lot of MMOs right now, you can use side characters. You don't see these quests, but you'll have these hirelings, and it'll say, do you want to send them to go speak at the UN, and you'll get a +10 to influence or whatever. What if you have a criminal one, and you're like, I want to send them to rob this bank, but the game simulates that. However, you can show up at the bank and take them out and subvert the entire thing. So you're the Lex Luthor. You're the one who's doing these kind of, you look to be good, but you're subverting the entire system. And
that's really clever. You could play with that a lot.
Yeah, and I just feel that that's one of the things. I don't know what developers, we talked about this, like you got your rock stars, you do have your the people who made Infamous, the people who made the other one.
You've got Sucker Punch. They could maybe do it. I mean, who would be a good fit for it? You'd have to have someone brave. You'd have to have someone who's used to doing adult content and isn't trying to look for the broadest audience and under the human race. You would have to have someone who had experience with open worlds. I don't know.
I think the biggest problem is
Insomniac. I think it'd be a really good fit, but would they be allowed to?
Insomniac could do it. I think a lot of games have tried this. I mean, the guys who did Until Dawn could try it, even though that would be a different style of game for them. That they're doing Man of Medan and all that stuff. But I think the biggest thing would be what you hit on earlier, which I sort of glossed over on accident, but the sex versus violence, because I think most devs are really frightened of, you have the big guns in the industry. You have like America and what we think is acceptable versus like Europe. So we switch. To us, violence is far more acceptable than sexuality, even though that I certainly would say is changing. And then you have UK, where sexuality is far more acceptable than violence. And you have these differing opinions. And then of course you have the rest of the world who all have their differing opinions of what's acceptable to put in a game.
This is the problem with devs or publishers in particular and how they sell this stuff, and that's why I don't think it'll happen, unfortunately. I mean, not only are you having to remove certain things from certain games in certain countries, Wolfenstein being an obvious one, but if we take something like Wolfenstein, like you've got the multiple sex scenes in the newer Wolfenstein games between Blazkowicz and his wife, you just couldn't push it much further than that, I don't think, because you're then taking that game, you're putting it in China, in Russia, in all these different places. That's the real problem. It's how do you manage this controversial material in games that are going to
let's
go
say
across
you
the
remove
world?
that and you just handle violence. You still run into the issue of violence as a bad guy versus violence as because
Oh yeah,
Nathan
absolutely.
Drake,
You're
we talked
doing
about
it
this.
in the wrong way.
Yeah, we talked about this prior. Nathan Drake can smirk and kill 2,000 people.
He's a slaughter machine.
He's a slaughter machine. He's a homicidal maniac. There's no defending the position he is, and you're supposed to ignore reality, which is fine. I do. I like the games a lot, but I'm not going to lie and pretend he's not. He absolutely is a smirking homicidal maniac. Batman ruins bodies, drives over people with his tank. It's all in the name of the game, right?
Flattens them.
So if we do it in the name of the game and you remove the sex part, you could still have violence, but I think the big thing is somebody would be up in arms, even though GTA and Trevor got away with it, and that's why I've always wondered how they got away with it. Sometimes I believe they get away with it because they just don't care, and I personally believe that a lot of developers would get away with more if they didn't care. That instead they hinge too much on what social media says, and 10 people say they're going to write a letter, a sternly written letter to Congress or whatever, and the company budges. Instead of saying, no, we're creating what we want to create. Authors do that most of the time, and I think the reason why authors get away with it is because the shit's not shown day one. The problem with games right now is too much data is known prior to its release. So people can get up in arms. Where if the game is out, then you're just like, it's just like a novel. The game is out and you certainly would have people up in arms, but it's out, it's created. It's sort of like a virus. You're responding to it after it's already infected the host. And
do you know what this would do? It would make the copycat violence debate go boom again. Because do you know the fundamental difference with what we're talking about?
Did you say copycat? You mean like somebody seeing a show and... Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but specifically with games, because you play them, you interact. So this is the fundamental problem with this stuff, and this is why it's so difficult for game developers to try and take on this stuff. If you're watching a film, or you're watching a TV show, or you're reading a book, whatever it might be, you are detached. You are not doing those violent things. Whether you enjoy watching them, whatever position you're coming from, that's fine. But as soon as you make that, you're playing it. I can tell you now, rating boards will be up in arms, parents will be up in arms. So it's really difficult for developers
here's the thing then. So let's look at Trevor. Trevor slaughters a bunch of people and they got away with it.
I think
I'm telling you, I think it's because they don't care. I think
well, they don't care, but also you've got two characters that maybe aren't that. Francis and the other guy. So you have that slight counter with the other characters in the world. They're all pretty reprehensible at times.
You mean the other two that are, Tommy and what's his name? Or I can't remember. It's Tommy. It's been a while since I played that game. But
I think if you were just Trevor, it probably would have been more controversial than it had it been with.
Well, look
with
at Kane
the
and
other two.
Lynch.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I agree. Actually, I totally agree. What I'm saying is, I'm wondering if
how can you get around it,
or
what
not worrying about getting around it, and if maybe the fear of the problem is causing these people to not do it versus the actual problem, which is just doing it, might not be as big of a deal as we all believe it is. Like,
I think so. I think you've got to push that boundary now and again, right up and see what's allowed and what's not. And if you're not going to do that, I think it would work brilliantly, this stuff in a game. But I just can't see a developer going,
well, what about Manhunt? That was also Rockstar, though. Right.
That was Rockstar, and and Manhunt 2 was like beyond R-rated, wasn't it? It was an A rating until they chopped out a load of stuff. But yeah, I mean that's a murder simulator basically.
So that was a above R, you're saying?
Yeah, I think when they first submitted it, they were told no way in hell, so they had to cut a bunch of stuff out for number 2, and then they secured the R.
Did we see anything in this movie or in this show? Let's remove the sex thing for a second. I don't think we saw anything in this show that would indicate to me anything worse than any of the crazy shit we've seen. Torture in GTA 5.
Nowhere near. Yeah,
so
nowhere near.
To me, as long as you don't have your character in these games, which, let's be honest, Lex Luthor doesn't do this, so I think it'd be fine. Unless you have them torturing somebody, I personally... This is why I'm solidly of the belief that a lot of developers are afraid and that the issue, there's two issues. One, fear, which makes total sense. There's nothing wrong with that. As shareholders, depending on how big your company is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the second, I think, is once again the fact that we see these games way before they're out, and the roll up begins of outrage.
Yeah,
and obviously you don't want a homicidal super or villain game. Isn't, I'm not against it. I just don't think it would be as interesting as, you know, a character that made sense for them to be.
Well, no, and that basically is Infamous. I mean, you could just go around sucking the crap out of people the whole time you're playing. That's not that fun to me. You'd want, as you said, the Genesis moment, the narrative points, a build-up where it makes sense that you're doing this. Like I mentioned right at the start of the podcast, if you're going to have a villain and you're going to play that villain, then the villain's logic must in some way have its own sense. Like, they think they're doing good.
Right.
Or they think they're helping the world out. And that way you can buy into it. If you're just a villain for the sake of being a villain, you're not going to enjoy it. It's not going to feel like anything because you're not going to feel attached to the character.
Yeah, and I think for me, when you look at the genesis for a game like this, let's ignore being a superhero for a second. Let's say you're just subverting the heroes you know are bad. I think that becomes more of a doable game.
I do.
You could do bad things, but you're a human, and whenever there's a superhero or supervillain against you, people will let humans get away with anything. You can get away with murder, right? You can get away with murder if your enemy is so overpowered that you're able to explain it away as this was the nuclear option because that was the only option we had.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's the Superman God bad thing, isn't it? You can't do anything about Superman really because he's so powerful. So that's why Superman games are so bloody terrible, because there's no real threat ever, because you can't find a way. But if you were then on the opposite side of that and you were creating this group to try and counteract these massively evil supervillains that are ruining the world, you know, that would really be cool. I think that's the way to do it, to make it actually doable.
But it's the far less interesting one to me.
It is. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is.
Like the idea of being the boys would be great, but it would be what I consider it would be like the more of the expected options versus, like, do you know what I would love? This is my cutscene. It shows you the genesis of this character, and then the game pans out, and it shows your superhero or supervillain standing there. This is you, right? And it shows just your torso up, and there's like maybe a building on fire around you, and it zooms out, and your foot is on the spine of a dead superhero, and you've broken him in half, and you're like, that, so you have done what you wanted to do at that exact point. That's where the game starts. And then maybe other people are after you. Maybe there are supervillains or superheroes are now after you. I know that's a hard-ass starting, but imagine what would happen if that was the starting. Your foot on the head of a superhero, and it pans out, and it subverts the superhero moment. Look at every Batman game. How does it start? Zooming out from Batman, standing on a fucking tower somewhere, you know, and it zooms out, and it shows the world. Imagine you get the exact same moment, and you're like, whoa, look at this open world, and as it zooms out, you're like, what's he doing? And you realize your character is necking the dude in all of your cutscenes at the start, like, is doing all this shit, and you're like 1 down, 10 to go, or whatever. And
well, it's kind of like The Watchmen, isn't it? The Watchmen is a bit like that, in that it subverts a lot of what superheroes are. It makes them immoral at times and corrupt, and some of the origin stories are very, very weird. And if you play around with stuff, the problem again is budget. So we just talked about like different developers who would have the money they'd be willing to put into a project like this, where it could be quite divisive as a game. Although by being divisive,
that's exactly, you open up your marketing done.
Yeah.
Exactly. It really would require, this is going to sound weird, it would require a THQ Nordic multi-billionaire who's been investing in games for a while to say, okay, we've invested in all these games. Now, the reason why we're doing this is we're going to subvert everybody's expectations. I mean, Prototype did it from Activision. It didn't do so well, but I think that's because it was not a good game. I don't care what anybody said. There was a lot of problems with Prototype. It looked bad,
No,
too.
one and two. And two, it was even Alex Mercer, the protagonist of the first game, is the bad guy in the second game.
Yeah,
so
it
just doesn't work very well. Yeah.
And with Prototype, it looked pretty good. It was Sucker Punch, who I think can get away with that.
Yeah, looked okay.
Yeah.
No, not Sucker Punch. That's Infamous.
Oh, that's sorry. That I'm jumping to Infamous. I apologize. Yes, because Infamous 2 I thought looked amazing,
Yeah.
and
I don't think it plays wonderfully well though.
it doesn't.
I played it recently, and it feels loose and a bit janky.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah,
I'm still saying it could still do the open city. It also
yeah.
depends
Oh
on
yeah,
how
yeah.
much you want to put into it. How much is the game based on, you know, multiple styles of missions? Well, that's going to require an incredible amount of programming. Or is it going to be more like those things are on the side and you're moving forward through chapters? Exactly what are you, how are you going about it?
I'll tell you what I could see happen in the future, and this is not what we're talking about really, but it might be one of the closest things we get, and that's we've seen lately in the Injustice games. They've been doing that whole Superman bad multiverse stuff. You could ask Rocksteady. You could get Rocksteady to make a game in which it's not just Batman, but it's the whole of DC, and then you have got you could play a villain within that universe, but again, then you're detracting from because you're going to have their motivations. They're already established. It's not going to be as hard hitting as something you're going to see in the boys. It's a difficult one. It is. But yeah, if you had a rock star in there with that kind of money and who just went, we're making a bad superhero game, done.
When I think right now we saw that we don't need the dark superhero either, where Spider-Man did amazing with the innocent superhero, right?
Yeah.
I just think that the opposite can be done as well, and that there's something there that people obviously, I mean, let's be honest, Umbrella Company made bank. All of these darker stuff are making bank, but no game really wants to go out there. And
yeah, and that's the problem. As you said, The Boys isn't particularly like it's violence. It has sexual scenes in it and stuff, but we're not talking like even Preacher levels of violence. Preacher is way more violent in parts than The Boys is. So it's not that. It's just a game company thinking, "Where's my audience for this? Will it travel well in different territories?"
Well, and also who your bad guys are,
investments?
because The Boys gets away with it because they're using a drill up the butthole of what's his name, the disappearing guy,
Translucent,
trying to kill him.
That's funny.
They finally
That's
figure
so
out
funny.
that shoving a explosive up his asshole is how to blow him up. But we already know he's a jackass because you tried to kill Hugh by smashing him with a TV. Like you already know that he's a brutal SOB and that he sits in the girl's bathroom naked.
Yeah, we already know he's a bit of a perv as well, and this kind of stuff.
And even though he's got a son, which they explain later, and Hugh's like, oh my God, he's got a son. It really does depend on how you treat the stock and trade good guys in a game or the innocents. And that's why I believe that both of these would work. You would just have to figure out, if you're a super villain, most super villains, even in TV shows, are not homicidal. There's usually something else going on, and that's why I think you could get away with it. And in fact, some supervillains are very good to the nitty gritty. They're the ones giving money to the people on the street who don't have any money to get them to work as watchmen and make sure that they don't.
What do you think about what's his face? Damn it! I was in there. It's immediately gone. Kingpin.
That's who I was thinking of. Strange you mentioned that. That's exactly what I was thinking of.
Because he could do that. You could have this empire, and he's seen as someone who's helping the city, who's rebuilding all these different things. But at the same time, he's being Kingpin. So someone like that could work quite well because then you're not just murdering left, right, and center. I think that's the key. If you had a way to have a villain who was villainous, not murderous necessarily, although that could come into it in various missions that you did and things that you had to do throughout the world. If it was more creating an empire, being powerful, stopping the good, I think that would work far, far better. You get away with that more.
Inserting your own good, which is evil. Like you said, every bad guy who's the most enjoyable is the one who thinks there's a reason to do it. Yeah, I'm certainly not, in all this discussion, I'm certainly not saying a homicidal character would work. I'm saying they have worked in the past, but there's a reason, like you described with Trevor. And also the tongue-in-cheek way in which GTA does its stuff, where I'm talking a little bit more brutal, like a Batman, which I think then lends, strangely, I'm going to say this, but I think for whatever reason lends a little bit of realism, because it's more, you're not switching between protagonists or antagonists in that matter. You're actually one person. You would be this one person, and every action they take has to be explained in some way to where it makes sense to you.
We want Spec Ops: The Line for supervillains.
Well, that's pretty much what I'm talking about. Even though I know everybody likes that game, it didn't really turn for me very well. I wasn't surprised by what was going on. In fact, I felt that right at the starting, it was way too in your face about what was going on.
Oh, it's very overt.
Yeah,
it's not like it's. I think a lot of people think it's subtle, but I didn't find that.
Yeah, it's about as subtle as a sledgehammer. That game is not. There's no subtlety to that game, but it did do something that we're talking about, which is subvert. The idea of like the good guy, and in like that was in particular the war game. The war game that we're accustomed to, which is like terrorists have come, you're going against him to fight him, and then you find out that he's sort of slipped at some point, and his fight has turned into a massacre. And
he becomes a despot or something.
And he becomes a despot, yeah. Yeah, I just think there's ways to do this, and I would love to see, I think the mission structure would matter, how you treat people. Do you get more for threats? Threatening somebody. I also love the idea of you being a superhero, and maybe you've got bad guys working for you, supervillain, sorry, and some guy shows up and he's done wrong. Do you have the ability to kill him? Like Superman does as a bad guy. Like, do you have the ability to look at him and say, okay, now you need to go out and fix it? Or you have a choice of like, what if you had a couple meters? What if you had a threat meter that was maybe internal? And the higher it was, the better people worked for you. But if it went too high, maybe it people started to maybe, leak some information.
They got frightened and run away, or they'd help other people.
But the idea of some guy showing up and being like, some superhero took over one of your bases, and you have that ability, right? If you choose, you're going to lose all of his bonuses. Let's say he's got a bonus. He's got a cool subterranean base. He offers you new weapons, but if you kill him, your threat level goes up, and all your people will perform better.
I just thought of a completely different take on this.
Go for it.
Why couldn't you do Civilization with supervillains and superheroes who each have their own part of the world or whatever it is, and in the same way you do with Civs, you make deals with them, you go against them, you try and murder them. That would work quite nicely. That'd be really interesting.
That's sort of what I'm thinking about for some of these side missions. I said where you don't get to see the character go do it. Speak at the UN.
You send them to the territory. And
imagine blocks. There's blocks in the city, and some blocks are controlled by some people. Some blocks are controlled by others. That would also give you the ability to go take out supervillains and superheroes alike, where you want their spot. I mean, so look at Arrow. One city. Look at Flash. One city. Flash is too powerful overall. He's so fast. Like most characters you wouldn't be able to take out. But if you had a copy of the Arrow called, like, I don't know, the Crossbow, whatever fuck his name is. But he shows up, right? And he's a protector, and you show up and you're all, I'm gonna take him out, which would then give me a higher threat level and give me, and this area I would get the bonuses from this area. I don't really like the idea of taking over multiple blocks in a game because I feel like that becomes really rote. But what I would like to see developers do, I would love to see a developer do that for one bad guy. So let me give you an example. One mission in the game is doing that, and you get their block stuff. And then another mission is something completely else. Because I think what we're getting in games is this cyclic game loop, where it's like, oh, they would love taking over a block of area, so let's have them do it 8,000 times. And I'm like, no.
That repetition constantly gets really grinding.
What if every new level you do or every new thing was a completely different style? I'm not saying you change the game, but I'm saying one was like you take out, the crossbow and you get this. Then the next one is like doing some investigations to find out something, beating up some dudes to find out more data, and you take out this bad guy by setting him up as a criminal, and the cops take him down. What if you threaten this other guy? Now he's on your team. That's 3 completely different setups. And that doesn't include all the mini stuff that you could be doing. Like I said, sending your own people out to rob banks and then you show up to fuck them over. Those kind of things. I think...
Do you know what would work as well? Dead Rising's timing system. It's never really been used in a lot of games.
Yeah.
But in this particular way, if you had... say you had a train that was about to crash, and you had a little girl who was about to be run over, you had a superhero who's gone rogue and was destroying buildings. You've got certain times you can't do them all, full stop. So you have to go and choose. That would really push the player in interesting ways.
You and I like that, but I'm going to tell you, the whiny bastards of the world they continually bitched about Dead Rising because there is a desire to get everything from gamers now.
Yeah.
There is a desire that they demand. They demand it, that they should be able to get everything. And I firmly believe you absolutely should not. And
that's why that game works.
It is why that game works. The sequels
slowly
lost
get
a lot.
worse and worse. Yeah, because you don't feel under any pressure at all. And
Right.
then, that first game when it came out, I thought was blinding because you're making these hard choices and it makes you feel like the character's more of your own, but also it puts you under pressure. Like, I've got 8 hours here to start.
Well, how about a
to the
mid?
military.
How about a mid? How about meeting them halfway? You could do them all, but depending on when you do them, they give you more or less stuff. And if you do them last, it's the least return you could get.
No,
Like, so, you don't like that. You want it to just be timed.
I do, but I mean, and you would have a mixture of missions that also are not timed at all. Obviously, that'd be the bulk. But I would want you to force the player to have to not
personally.
save that person.
Yep.
Because then in your own mind, it's like, and then that could transmit to, again, the in-game podcast, the newspapers, the way the world sees you. I just think that would work so bloody well because you've done your best, but you've had to not be able to save that train.
And if you switch over the game, to more like The Boys, then you could have a thing where, do you go get the information from this guy? Do you set up this superhero and try to trap him and fuck him over? Do you set up this other superhero to get in trouble and you have to choose?
Do you plant the bug? Do you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All these little side missions that could be done, and then you've got to make that choice, and then you miss out on something, but you gain something else. Love that. I love that design. That worked beautifully in this type of game.
Yeah, I think there's just a fear of. Well, it's not only a fear. I mean, I saw it firsthand with Dead Rising because that was when I was first starting to really get into that kind of game, and I was so impressed with Dead Rising. Number one, technically, with thousands of zombies on screen and all this crazy shit, and I remember the outrage, just the legit outrage. How dare you make a game that I might have to play through twice to get all the missions? And I was just like, we are there. Every board game in the world does that. Everything in the world does that. But for some reason, gamers in particular on that element got incredibly entitled. And we're so angry.
They want everything, which fundamentally breaks that design of the game. I mean, let's face it, after then, Dead Rising just became a slaughterfest.
Well, look at Skyrim. One of the worst parts of Skyrim is you can join all three of the groups.
Yeah. Every single faction you can join.
Mm-hmm. It neuters the very... Well, that's why I liked Vampire. Vampire, I said this in the review, what choice do you make if every choice hurts? That's Vampire. That's the way they do it. They're like, listen, everything you do is going to have a negative because this is trying to replicate, at least in some way, a supernatural being killing people. So there's got to be a return on the emotional investment, which is that everything you do will have a positive. You'll get power, or a negative. That person's gone from the world. They're gone. They're literally not there anymore.
You could do that as well. You could take that vampire. I mean, the reason vampire works is because you have to get to know the person. The more you know, the more blood you're going to get. You might find clues about other people. Then you make that decision. This guy I'm going to kill because I want the blood. You could do the same. It's just that you want to stay away from the infamous just sucking for no reason. So if you could, depends how big you made the game, but if you made it so that you had to in some way interact with these people, or you gain more power from them if you spoke to them, then you made a choice about it, that would also tie into a better morality system than the just black and white. That's your only binary choices.
So let's say we go superhero or super villain first. What kind of powers? I personally believe a mid-tier character. I know you were saying Lex Luthor, but I'm still sort of stuck on the highest you can make this guy is mid-tier. But it sounded like you were thinking you could actually make him a little higher tier than that. The reason why I was saying mid-tier is it felt like if you were too high tier, all the good guys would be against you, and you would die you would lose that ability to continue or to continue in anonymity, which is what I think sort of works. But what about you? Like, do you think...
No, I agree. I think the only reason I mention Lex Luthor is because he doesn't have any powers. So you could play with the notion of him building different things rather than... Because as you say, if you're suddenly like on par with a Superman or a Wonder Woman, one of the really hardcore top tier, then what's the point?
Work.
There's no threat there. There's no way for you to have to figure out how to stop these heroes. You would just be powerful enough to do it anyway. Right. So I would agree, like a lower mid-tier supervillain who's coming up through the ranks, as it were, who's building things around them, and then you would have like 4 or 5 moments during the game, the big boss battles where you've set up like Superman sets Batman sets up for Superman in the film to Dawn of Justice. You know, he can't defeat him on his own. He's got to set that stuff up. That kind of stuff I'd really like. And as you said, finding out their weaknesses, finding out locations they can be taken to, you know, trying to take them down that way. I think that would work really, really well.
I think also when you look at this, like, you have to look at their powers, and I personally think that what we normally notice is that the mid-tier guys have that one power, right? Like, Superman's got multiple, then you got the Flash who's speed. Well, he's got strength and, like, metabolism. That always seems to go with speed. I used to joke saying, wouldn't it be funny if the guy was just super fast, but his bones couldn't hold up? Brittle bone hero, right?
Brittle bone,
So the moment he tries to run, shit's just like, snap, snap. Or he doesn't have that high metabolism. Because I think in the Flash #1, he breaks his wrist when he runs. He falls. He breaks his wrist, and then, like, in a small amount of time, after eating, like, some sugar and, you know, stuff to stop him from getting diabetes, he ends up being fine. I think technical superheroes work well in these kind of, like, a Batman style, but I would rather have, if you're going to do a superhero game, I still think electricity works. Infamous tried that. The elemental stuff seems to work, where they're not...
Elemental stuff works, yeah. I think if you started doing stuff like super speed or beams
gameplay-wise,
or
that
flying,
would be hard as fuck, right?
Yeah, I think you'd need to keep it to something that you could... Like actual laser beams, lightning, stuff that you can emit from your body, things like that, or being able to morph into something, that would work much, much better.
Do you know what I liked as a superhero? And this is in a movie that no one likes, so I want to make sure this is clear. I'm not saying it's good. Gambit in Origin, Wolverine, when Gambit, who's played by Taylor Kitsch, or whatever his name is.
Kitsch, yeah.
He doesn't have the greatest powers, but he has the ability to, like, speed up projectiles, climb up the wall with his staff, and a couple other things. If you had
light cards on fires, make little explosions.
If you had a kinetic power, I think it would be very cool if you had the ability to, like, touch a car, throw the car, but not just like superpower where you can pick up a car and throw it. Like, if you could, you know...
You could do telekinesis. That might not be a bad one, because then telekinesis specifically is the physical movement of stuff, so you could make that more and more powerful throughout the game.
Right.
And you could tie that in quite nicely to the way that you could fight villains then, because you could have a targeting system. You could end up like the very boss of the game. You're throwing trucks at them and stuff, or trains.
Yeah, and I was thinking it would be cool if you had a game, you know, if there's like a stone building, you can't punch through the wall, but if there was a car nearby, you could push the car through the wall to get in there, or you could go up the side and break in. You know, so it's a mix, I think, of the technical. I think with a lot of supervillains, it always turns out to be resources that they're the best at when they're a good fun... Not supervillain, sorry, mid-tier villain. Usually when they have resources, you see the Arrow, he had multiple millions of dollars. He loses it, of course, but then gains it back, whatever. You have Batman, who's really the opposite of him. He doesn't kill anybody, where the Arrow kills everybody, at least at the starting. I would love to see them do it also where the superhero powers make sense as you grow, supervillain powers. I think one of the problems with most games is it's, once again, the cyclic upgrade. The fucking Batarang turns into this when you go up a level, and you're like, why wouldn't Batman have that right away? What the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, none of this makes sense. It's like, oh, well, if you spend points in the street, by the way, you can just buy points, and suddenly your Batarang does something else. I would much rather have it, you have to build towards stuff, and those things cost a lot for not the biggest return, because you're a supervillain. So to me, I would love it where if you did a lot, you would get like one upgrade. Like, it wouldn't be some massive thing. It would be a very hard fought, almost like you were saying time limit in Dead Rising. I want a limit to the powers where when you get it, it's tangible. Because they're not tangible.
Yeah.
Almost all superhero
And then you're also making hard choices. Like, I'm really dedicating myself to this particular power and the branches off which that can create. Not this one, because I have not got the points. And then if you're trying to have a little bit of this power, a little bit of that power, a little bit of that power, you're kind of defeating the point.
Exactly. Well, for example, if you're a super villain and you're trying to make a suit to kill the main good guy, and this suit, you can choose between super strength but no bullet resistance, right? So you're sort of like the machine in Aliens, where you're picking shit up with your prong. So you've got the strength and all that, but if somebody shoots you in the face, you're still going to get hurt. I would love that. Or what if you said,
That'd be great for Spider-Man.
I've got a repulsor, which is going to repulse fast incoming weapons, sort of like Dune. Dune has the personal shields where slow gets through it, fast doesn't. So you have this repulsor, but then you can't outfit your character with super strength because you have this repulsor. So you now don't have to worry about people with ballistics, but you have to worry about, the other things that are going to come about. Elemental wouldn't be stopped by that. Fire would still burn you, all those kind of things. I think that even with any superhero game, we've already lost the narrative with most superhero games are just handled piss poor. Even Spider-Man. Spider-Man didn't even explain the suits half the time. It was like, you just have a new suit. You're in the middle of the fucking battle, and you're just like, new suit. But what
There's 25 new suits.
Right, but wouldn't it have been cooler if you went back to your lab, right, and you've collected something, and it shows just a moment of Peter using what we consider to be his stellar intelligence for a young kid and a sense of experimentation. You always look at how many Spider-Man games or shows and games start that way. Experimentation. Oh, I'm learning my web slinger. And then once he's learned it, they never do it again. They're like, he can fucking roll out. He's like the Autobots. It's like, we got a new one no matter what we need. I want the continued feeling of experimentation. Where you're trying to figure out what to do. Or what about superpowers that aren't always good? As in, you get something positive from it, but it also hurts you. Do you have laser beam
think about Rogue.
out of your eyes, but still, do you harm yourself when you shoot it?
Well, yeah, Rogue and X-Men. She can touch. Obviously, she has super strength and flight, but when she touches you, she gains some of your power. But sometimes that is not a good thing.
Oh,
yeah,
true.
exactly.
Yeah, sometimes that's not. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and you've got that dichotomy then.
I think with a villain, it matters even more because a superhero is usually outmatched. A supervillain could be outmatched, but I think with a supervillain, it makes more sense because the more resources you get as a supervillain, the faster the superheroes are going to show up. And I like the idea of somebody who sort of toils in mediocrity on purpose because that anonymity is what sort of gives them their strength. They're sort of anonymous. They're not the Batman of the world everybody knows. They're the Owl. They're the side character that people are like, there's this dude, but we don't exactly know everything that's going on with him. And you're able to sort of take out the superheroes because you show up out of the surprise, because you know more than they do, because they're surprised at what your ability is, even if that ability may harm you. I love the idea, for example, of the ability to cause kinetic explosions, but you kill your own guys. Or your own dudes with you and you're taking out the good guy. The good guy's doing this crazy shit in a boss battle. The bad guys are doing damage to him slowly. And if you want, you can do your kinetic hammer, which is going to do a ton of damage, but half your dudes are going to fucking die. And to me, no game has done that. I don't think we've ever seen a superhero game or a game, for the most part, give you a negative. It's always about ultimate power. It's always, and I don't think that would work for a supervillain game. I actually think it would directly hinder it.
You would need some. You can have it so that, say, like you started the game, you did the origin stuff. You had that moment of, hey, this bad thing happened. I'm going to be the hero. And then say you had missions like you have to collect a certain material to make Kevlar part of your arm, or for whatever reason. So you go to this place. You've got, say you've got what you said. So you've got kinetic ability, and you use it for the first time, and you kill a bunch of factory workers at the same time as trying to steal the material, and then the Owl shows up, say, just as a a subsidiary superhero who's very, very low level. That's the first one you meet, just like Fisk is in the Spider-Man game, or Scorpion, and then it escalates from there. But you've got that counter production then, so anytime you do something, the risk is always there that you'll do some harm, and then the people who you'll come up against will escalate, become more powerful.
Exactly. That's to me that's the magic of it, is that continual escalation of calling and then you get to choose almost. Imagine this. What if you're sort of subterfuge, right? You're powerful, but you're purposely not going balls out because maybe there's a thing like chance of superhero being called is being raised. And
I like that.
Yeah, and you're doing shit. You're sort of stealthing because if you do too much, Spider-Man shows up, right? So or some low-level superhero. So maybe who's in that area, and maybe you can even imagine hacking police radio scanners. You can find out Batman's on the other side of this city. So I'm going to do this thing subterfuge over here. Hopefully he doesn't come over. But then you decide to do it, and there's a chance of a boss battle happening wherever you are. Because how many times is it like climb to the top of the tower, boss battle's going to happen?
Cutscene triggers, you're locked in an environment.
Yeah. What if you get out? You've done everything. You get out, the cops are up, and you're like, I bought the power armor, but I forgot to buy the repulsor. Cops are killing you, and you're like, listen, I'm going to have to fucking do this. So you do your main attack, cops go down, and it's like, boop, fucking you showed up as a blip on this superhero's radar. And then you get to decide, what if you purposely are sneaky and you're powerful, and you're like, now I'm going to call them. Maybe because you know in this one area, maybe they're a swinging character or something. You're like, you know what, they won't have as much mobility here. So I'm going to call them here. And we're going to have this boss battle in this location that might offer me some pluses that it doesn't, because no game's done that, man. I mean, occasionally you will see in, I think in Spider-Man, you occasionally will bump up against characters randomly, if I remember right.
Yeah, and like Arkham City, you've got like the Man-Bat and stuff, and you've got Zaz, and they're
it's
all
funny
like,
you mentioned Man-Bat, because that's
same,
actually one of the side characters I was thinking when I was saying the superhero game has these characters that don't really do anything unless you decide to follow that trait line in the story.
Yeah, you could totally stay away from them.
Yeah,
but, you know.
But imagine here it was softer, and it didn't tell you what that line was, other than these gauges of like, you know, social gauges, like. What if somebody takes a picture of you? What if you decide to buy a skill that allows you to disrupt electronic devices, so nobody can take a picture of you with their iPhone? So you're anonymous for the most part, and you hear the podcast. There's this this villain that's showing up, blah blah blah, but no one can seem to find him because he has the ability to disrupt. And then maybe you're going up against these guys who start using their own skills against you. Like they start, all of a sudden you start seeing like these cameras that are up that have interference devices that stop them from being affected by your ability. And now you're like, fuck, here we go.
It's like Batman, but low level. I mean, much higher level. You know, Batman, obviously, you first of all, you're on the gargoyles, you can go everywhere. Then the guards start realizing that. They start shooting the gargoyles, or they put bombs on them so you can't use them. Just at a much higher level. We talked about GTA. I mean, you could literally do the same rating system on a grander scale, but the same rating system with the cops chasing you.
Yep.
And then if you're at 5 stars and you've murdered a load of people, you've got soups flying around behind you.
Or you've got a different superhero from that location that you know.
Yeah,
and
in
then
that particular part of the
you get to
system.
choose. Because how many times have we played GTA where you purposely kill a bunch of people because you want the suburbans to show up? I did that tons of times. So imagine the same thing, but with a superhero. And maybe you have to do a ton. But and also those jobs I was talking about starting, like going and robbing. Like, do you go rob? You do it stealthily. Nobody shows up. And but maybe on your way out, you fuck up and you kill somebody or what have you. And then you have that moment where you're like, how many people saw it? Now, of course, all these systems are requiring a lot. Let's be honest.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about an indie dev is not making this game. Even a AA developer probably is not making this game. You have to have, with this amount of systems in place, what we're talking about in terms of the frequency of like superheroes, just the sheer amount of development time it'll take. 3 years to make something, that big.
I just think that I think supervillains are where you can get away from the cyclic shit that I'm really tired of.
Yeah, and it would make you stand out as a game.
Yeah.
Because right now, if you release a superhero game, what are you expecting? A third-person action adventure with rinse and repeat mechanics and rinse and repeat.
Here's 21 suits. Here's 21 web slingers. Here's 20, and I get that, but I think a supervillain, there's a little bit better of a chance, except for Batman who has this, but I think there's a better chance of making it more interesting. Also, let's talk about his home. So there's a reason why I'm going to bring this up. When I thought about this original idea, this is what popped into my head when I first thought about doing this podcast. Imagine I have a subterranean base, and in that base, I have the suits of all the superheroes I've killed in glass cases. So this reminded me of Batman when he sees Robin's suit, right? Imagine this battered suit, and it's like Batman. And you look, it wouldn't be called that, called Man-Bat, whatever the fuck it'd be called, whatever wouldn't run over a DC or a Marvel. But you see this suit, and everybody you killed is like, because this happens all the time in a game where it's like you have a stronghold, you can put it's Saints Row, let you put stripper poles in it.
They do it in one of the Batman games, don't they? I think it's Arkham Knight. They have, but it's obviously the bad guys that you've taken away to Arkham or whatever.
But imagine the darkness of that. The darkness of you wouldn't collect their heads. Like, we don't have to go that dark. But imagine this Hall of Infamy, right? This
Well, you just take like an item, wouldn't you? Like the famous glasses they wear, or
right,
a piece of their
Cyclops'
cape,
glasses
or
are just
yeah,
in a thing and just
or the
hinting.
symbol they've ripped off their chest or whatever. Yeah.
Well, remember I was talking about it pans out and your foot is on the spine of a superhero, right? That you've just killed. What if the first time you go home, now his suit with like the back is bent, or it's just the upper body and there's a footprint in the chest, And you're
Oh
like,
man, yeah.
you're like, that is the start of everything. That is the start of like this Hall of Infamy that I've begun. And to me, I think I just honestly believe that we need it. I think superhero games are great, but I'm already getting burned out. TV shows, I'm already getting burned out. Movies, and I'll still watch them, but you know what I mean.
That's why The Boys is so good, because ever since like Heroes came out and that they thought they were doing something a bit different, and then on and on we go with all these different series. But up until now, The Boys is the most in-your-face, complete subversion of expectations I've seen in years.
And do you know why The Boys works also? The cyclic is gone. Every single guy they encounter, they have to take out a different way, including one guy they have to take out in 20 ways before they figure out how to kill him. The cyclic bullshit of like upgrade is gone. Instead, their major resources are people who've been fucked over. And when he went to the AA meeting, I was telling my wife, I was like, do you think in the comics, because I haven't read the comics, do you think he goes there to get new people? Because that's how he got Hugh.
To recruit. That's a good idea, yeah.
Imagine you're sitting there and you're looking at people and you're trying to subvert them and you're listening, and one of them is like, he really holds this dire part. He hasn't made the step, and you come to him and you're like, listen, I get you. It's good you're here, but let's go out for a drink. And then you slowly... Because remember, Billy lies to Hugh at the starting. He says, no, Headlander's perfect. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke. He lies. He doesn't tell Hugh anything about Headlander whatsoever. He purposely obfuscates that entire situation by lying to Hugh that of all of them, he's perfect. Even though to him, he's the worst one because he wants him for himself. And the idea, the smartness of Billy and how he fucking controls Hugh would be so amazing if that's what we find out, is that he's going to these resource meetings. He figures out the weakness, and the weakness is the people around these superheroes who have fucked up. And I just think that would be awesome, because we all know there's characters, as you said, the last Spider-Man. Everything about the last Spider-Man's bad guy was based around the heroes fucking over the good guy, or fucking over normal people. And those normal people coming forward. Everything about the recent Avengers movies was all about normal humans coming forward and saying, this can't continue. We can't have you mulching humans.
They've just taken it to the logical extension of where it should have gone years ago. That's what they've done. I
Right.
mean, even I think it's done it justice. I think the guy who ends up in a wheelchair because of all the stuff that happened when Superman destroyed Zod, the city destroyed, etc. It's a little bit like that. But this just takes it so far. As you said, most of these superhero things now are how the world's being affected by superheroes, people are being killed by them, and these big sky beams are destroying everything. The Boys just goes, yeah, okay, so what would people do about it then? Forget politics and what is Superman and all this stuff. What if this stuff actually went to the furthest point it could? What would you then do? That's what The Boys does so well.
Yeah, and the Boys subverts it also in the fact that it uses multiple bad guys or multiple antagonists and protagonists overlapping. For example, Headlander, he ends up... Homelander.
I kept calling him Outlander.
Homelander ends up setting up the terrorists with superpowers just so he can take control. Those kind of things, if done in a super villain game where you were the Boys, or a super villain, or a villain who is gray, where you know the guy's in control, all these dudes, these bosses you're taking out aren't perfect. That overlapping of antagonists and protagonists is what's the juice of the Boys. It's what works. It's why it works, and it's why I personally believe that kind of thing would work in a game, because you could do some terrible things in these games, but what if, you find out that the superheroes themselves might be one step worse than you? Because you're thinking about these things at least. You're thinking about, do I use my power to kill all these guys? Yes, you're thinking about it as a resource. Oh, if I kill them all, the star's going to go up and I'll lose some of their bullet damage they're doing to people. At least you're thinking about it. But what if these superheroes
Well, yeah,
show up and
yeah.
they're just fucking laying waste, man? They're just destroying everything, and you
could play with the player with that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you just mentioned it. You could have it so that, okay, so say there's a big superhero in the world.
Keep talking. I'll be
and
right back. Continue.
You have a big superhero in the world, and they go and try and save some people who are doing something, and they manage to save them. And so all the media throughout the world is saying how wonderful this superhero has been. And then you come across them, and they're murdering someone or destroying somebody for no reason. So you could really play with the players' expectations and make them think, okay, what kind of hero am I going to be? I'm going to have to stop these at some point, but maybe this one is actually helping me now. So you could mess around with the kind of intentions of the player and why they're being evil, as it were, when really it's a bit more morally ambiguous, I would say. That's how you would get that to work.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Always a dog. So you were saying that about what were you saying? Just summarize it for me.
Just that if you had it so that in the world, one of these superheroes who's supposedly really, really bad did something incredibly good. And so throughout the world, you heard about the fact that they'd saved these people on a plane from crashing or whatever it is. But then later on, you come across them doing something reprehensible.
Oh.
And so then you've got that choice to make. So the player isn't just, they are bad, I must kill them.
Right.
Because they thought they were good in the world, and then they find out they're not. And then you as a player make a different choice again.
Or
do I stop them?
What if you thought they were... Are you saying what if you thought they were bad and they were good too?
Yeah, exactly.
So that could play on a lot of stuff. That could definitely see that's
because then you're not forcing the player down a little narrow passage. You're saying you make the choice. Here's the world as we present it. You make the choice. Is this bad? Is this person good? Are you going to help them? Are you going to join with them? Is that a good choice anyway?
See, I know we talk about developers, especially when you look at resources, what they would need, but I do have to say this. I think with the advent of like the new engines, the new consoles, new graphics cards, all this kind of stuff, I personally believe that as long as you don't go nuts and try to do different cities, especially in your first game, if this was more about one city, try to do it well. We've seen games, they're not of Spider-Man level, but I also think that as we up in technology, getting to Spider-Man's level will be easier. Those guys will go higher. It'll be that kind of thing. But also, as long as you don't go crazy with the technology that the villain has in that first one, like the ability to super speed, which would fuck up your graphics engine. It makes it harder to figure out how to render. But you have a guy who, does he have does he travel via the subway? Like, is he that kind of villain where like he doesn't, or does he travel via a car? Does he fast travel? How exactly? What are his abilities?
Yeah, and I know we talked about a lot of systems, but just choose the 3 or 4 that are really important to the fundamental experience and focus on making them good before you even consider adding more on top.
Right, and remember, Batman loves the nighttime. Like, every game of Batman is always based at night. So I get that daytime is a little bit more difficult. However, I do feel that, especially now as we go in with these new technologies and we start to see these new graphics engines, what they can do. And I think most people allow open world games to have a little bit of leeway compared to like a linear, depending on the developer.
Oh, yeah. Given the amount of stuff that goes on in them, definitely.
Yeah, I just personally feel that because it's a criminal game, there's a chance most of it will happen at night. And I'm okay with that. I think, in fact, I think Spider-Man makes sense that it can happen at any time. Batman makes sense because, it's Batman, right? It doesn't look... We saw that in number 3 of the Nolan movies, where Batman during the day looks like a fucking idiot. Like, it looks horrendous. Yeah. His fight with Bane...
guy in a bat suit.
His fight with Bane in the daytime was cringy as fuck. It looked horrendous. Yeah. And it's during the day, and you're like, dude, nothing looks right in this. So... I think with a villain, because you want to obscure, you want to use the shadows. I think nighttime, I
you just want to make sure that you have that level of interaction that you have with Spider-Man's world, so you at least have some problem with Batman is, and a lot of it was the technology at the time, which is changing slowly, but you never felt the world was reacting to you ever. Because it was just henchmen on the ground that you would go and fight.
Remember, they made a lie, and every one of the games they found some way around having normal people on the street.
Yeah, you turn it into Escape from New York or Escape from LA, like John Carpenter. Turn it into this lockdown island, remove all the NPCs really that you could actually interact with or might make sense in the world.
Right.
Spider-Man does that way better. Just flip that to nighttime, and I think you'd have a really, really cool world to work with.
Yeah. When it comes to like overall powers, I do think gadgetry or at least one or two superpowers is probably your limit. I think
Yeah, because if you overpower, as we've said, I just think you'll end up with a game that becomes really silly and ends up a bit Saints Row-y if you go that far.
Right. Saints
You need to
Row
make it more
3 and
tangible.
4, I can't remember them. Now, I don't mean that in a bad way, but did they technically, when you were flying around the city, did they technically have a shit ton of pop-in? Were they okay?
Don't know. Never played them.
Okay, what ones did you play, 1 and 2?
1 and 2, yeah. And I played 3 very briefly, but apart from that, I haven't played them.
I played Gat Out of Hell, which was fucking horrendous.
It's the 4th one.
It's the side story. It's about Gat going to hell.
The one that came after. Yeah.
Oh man, that was bad. And I played 3 and 4. I'm spacing. I'm getting Crackdown 3 overlaid on top of it for some reason.
Yeah. Crackdown is in my mind. We'll be discussing a lot of this stuff as well, especially the first one.
Yeah. I think when you look at this, like technically wise, I do honestly believe that a lot of companies could pull it off if it was smart and they didn't go nuts on. The only thing I was thinking about is population. Like, how do you handle? It's hard enough to handle it when you're a good guy. You give the bad guy a reason to not want to kill a bunch of people. And I think, honestly, statistically, when you look at almost every supervillain, they don't just randomly murder anybody on the street like they're a lawnmower. You know, they're not just running around with blades on their hands.
Oh man, I mean, if we're playing it like The Boys, which is the point in this, then they want to make money. Most of them, they don't want to go murdering. They don't want to murder their audience if they can help it, because those people are giving them good press and keeping them, held on a pedestal where they can make all this money from the social media and the branding and all that crap. So if you had that stuff in there, it would make it more tangible, I think.
So I have a question. We start this game. Spider-Man, no character creation. Batman, no character creation. DC Universe Online, yes, I admit, I absolutely adore it. You can be villains. They do a pretty okay job, but they pretty much just consider you as a criminal. What do you think this would make more sense to have an established villain / character and not allow the player to create that villain? Or do you think what about Mass Effect, real quick, before you continue? What about Mass Effect where you get to choose one of 3? Remember at the starting, you choose like Streetwise, Mercenary, whatever, and then they pan out and they're talking and Shepard's looking out the window and they're like, he was a Streetwise tough on blah, blah, blah. Would you rather have something like that, or do you think it makes just more sense cinematically and gameplay-wise to a solid?
I would actually go with your in-between one there. I think you need to have an actual character that's written that that has lines that isn't just anonymous.
Okay.
Because I don't think it would work the other way around. I do think you could do like Mass Effect, where you could choose between 3 different types of supervillain, and that's the supervillain you then play, and they all have different things you can branch out into stats.
Maybe tech. Do you mean they're that kind of super like?
Yeah. So a tech superhero, a
elemental
superhero, say, or elemental. Yeah, there you go. And that would work then, because then you could tailor. The game would then know then that you're tailoring your play experience to a particular type of experience within the world that's being set up.
And I think we agree, right, that when you set this up, you would not want a silent protagonist.
Right? No. I just don't think it would work. I think you would have less investment in the character's relationship with the world. And if we're talking about a game where you're going to be making these morality-based choices that aren't just binary, then again, I feel like you need some scripted elements to really push that character forward.
Yeah, and I think also you would need that because, especially once you start meeting up with some of these superheroes, it'd be hard. If it was mute or just hitting a button, it'd be hard to be like, I watched you kill my mom. If it's me imagining him say that, whether I know
there'd be too much dissonance, I think.
Yeah. I would want to hear the terror in somebody's voice, or the seething anger in somebody's voice, to be like, I watched you kill. You let it happen.
Yeah.
Now when it comes to that, I said fucking, and that actually brings me back to one of the original things. How do you think he'd be portrayed? Would you rather have him be portrayed where you could have a choice of what he says, so you could say, I watched you kill my fucking mom, or I watched you slaughter my mother, where you chose some distinctive like answers? Or would you rather have it be more sort of like Spider-Man, where it's like back and forth, and how raw would you want that superhero to, or supervillain to be? Would you want him to be raw or like Lex Luthor, where he's like Superman? You know.
I guess it depends on. Well, do you want the game to be shaped around the way your dialogue's then interpreted by other folks in the world, and that's the way choices work, or do you want it so that the actions you perform in the world are the driving force behind the way the narrative works?
For me, actions.
So I just think like Spider-Man, you can have different outcomes and different cutscenes depending on the way you've dealt with a situation, and that would then tie into a proper, fully written character. I think if you start going down the path of having a more choice-driven narrative in that literal sense, I just don't think it would work as well.
Don't you also think that slows it down in a superhero if you have the choice to stop and choose what to say versus maybe you did something which is causing him to say a certain thing?
It's another system as well on top that I just don't think would probably work that well with all the other systems in play. I think the action thing is way more interesting. Like you have a choice. You need to. Well, let's do the Green Goblin thing when Spider-Man in the first film has to choose. He does both because he's bloody Spider-Man. But Mary Jane and the bus, he's holding over the bridge. Now, what if you had to let go of one? Simple as that. One had to die. Yep. You make that choice. Then the cutscene or the narrative is directly related to that physical action you've made in the world.
Well, and, everybody disses on the... I've told you, as time's gone on, I've started to like the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans more than I did. And I honestly believe it retconned it for me to like it more when Gwen died. Because Peter Parker's Spider-Man was never... Due to when it was made as a movie, I firmly believe it was when it was made is why we saw this. Peter Parker never had any threat. Ever. There was just no threat. He lost his friend in the emo one, but there was no threat. His chick was banging the other dude behind his back, whatever, but there was never a worry. And when Gwen died, even though, again, how it was set up, and when it happened and everything didn't really work out, but there was a threat to it that even Spider-Man, the new ones, have not yet worked out for me. Even with the ending stingers in this last movie's credits, I still don't feel that there isn't a threat yet. And I think with a villain game, you can have that threat. You can have that threat. Maybe the reason why you hate them is because they dropped the subway to save their girlfriend. What if every one of these superheroes you hate, there's some reason why? Like, they drop, that would be very connective. Probably too much. But I love the idea of you hating him because he dropped the subway to save his girlfriend. I think there's something so amazing about that, where you show up and you're like, listen, bitch, you had the choice to save many people and you chose your girlfriend. Like, I hate you. And I hate you. Well, look at, I think we all agree the prequels aren't great, but the last one I felt was the best because at the end, when Anakin's on fire, he doesn't try to put himself out. He's on fire. His hair is burning off, and he's looking at Obi-Wan. He's like, "I fucking hate you," and you're all, "Oh shit!"
Screaming it.
Yeah, that's when you know. No wonder Obi-Wan went into hiding. He's like, "Damn, son, that might have been the wrong choice. Like, maybe you should have given up the high ground and locked him up with some fucking force
back away
handcuffs."
from the Vader, run quickly.
Yeah, and and again, I don't think those movies are great, but that was one of the first times where I felt true emotion was shown ever, and I think that emotion is shown because of the loss. And he feels wronged, right? Distinctly. And then what does Anakin do? Everything he does, even killing kids, he believes is done because of all the wrongs, that were done against him.
And he believes he's now doing the right.
And he firmly believes it. Like, he believes it. He destroys planets until finally, and then that's where I wanted to go with this. We get to the end of The Boys, and I want to talk about the end of the game. How would we do this? So you get to the end of The Boys. Butcher finds out that basically they've all been lied to by Elizabeth Shue's character, really, and they've all been lied to by Homelander's character.
Yeah.
And so what happens is Butcher kills the baby and Elizabeth Shue. He literally says something like, "Fuck it," or I don't remember what he says, but he's like, "Oh well," and he tries.
Oh yeah, it's really blasé.
It's pretty blasé for a dude who murders a baby. Like, it's pretty wrong. And he's jetted off. He finds out his chick may or may not have cheated on him, but she's had this baby, blah, blah, blah. How would you end a super villain game like this? Let's go with if it was more of trying to take down superheroes you knew were bad, like the boys, and then we'll go with the true villain game that we were talking about. So how would you, would we finish it where you're just like, you win? Could you get away with a dark ending in a game? Can you get away with that kind of ending? Can you truly get away with it?
That's a really good question because I'm not sure you
Mass Effect tried.
Depends how ambiguous. Well, yeah, but he tried, didn't it?
But...
If you can be ambiguous and leave wiggle room there, then there's no reason why not. But it's really difficult to do in a game like that because people want closure. The problem with closure in this sense is what do you have? That image that you said near the start of the podcast of the super villain with his foot on the chest of the superhero who's actually really bad. I mean, is that how you end it?
You mean reverse it almost? We're like,
exactly.
Yeah, you could do that.
But you'd need some ambiguity, tempt the sequel, make it a bit more interesting than just straight up, oh, the bad guy's killed the bad guy. Great.
True.
So yeah, it'd be do you know the most difficult thing I think for the game we want to be made? It's not the mechanics, because they've been done before. It's not the characters, it's not the world. These have all been done before. It's the writing. How well the writing has to be in order to capture exactly what we're talking about and not make it end up just trite. Your standard Skybeam with your standard monster who's got your villain who's got the standard, oh, I just want to be evil for the sake of it.
The reason why I think this is possible, Sleeve, is because we've got shows like Dexter, right? We've got shows where a homicidal killer, a serial killer, somehow is a protagonist, right?
But again, this is what I talked about.
So
we are detached because we're watching it. As soon as you say you're playing that evil thing, everyone loses their minds. Right. That's the difference.
Yeah. Well, let's ignore, because yes, that's a big deal. If we did talk about the writing, let's pretend we're getting it made. I would say that, the writing would require almost every event that occurs in some way for it to not only, you couldn't have him be homicidal. So you would have, they would have to either build, which I think is good writing anyway, build towards the end, or continue to explain how you got there in all the moments of writing. I personally believe a sense of vengeance gets you through a lot. That gets you through a lot of shit writing is a sense of vengeance, because you can explain it. You can just be like, makes sense because it's vengeance. I think there's that. But
gives it a justification for turning bad, as it were.
I think that ending, that's what ruined. One of the things I didn't like about the ending is a sense of vengeance I felt was removed, and it was a blasé, like, like it just didn't work for me. And I wonder how in a game how you would do that. Do you have the sense of vengeance kill your villain? Do you have yourself die? I mean, you could do that. You could be like, you could have him die.
I wonder if you could have it. Hey, do you know what would be quite interesting, I guess, if you had both die at the same time? So, you're this villain who's been trying to take out this other superhero who's been known to the world. Maybe you expose him, and then you expose them, her, whoever the supervillain is, and then you get into this massive fight. You both die, and then something ambiguous is in there to allow the story to carry on in a different way.
Well, let's ignore a sequel, even though we both know most developers.
We haven't got the first one made yet.
Yeah, most developers would want a sequel. We know that. We know the obscure death rule would play out, but let's pretend it doesn't. It could be cool if all you show is the battered remnants of a city block, and these guys' curled hands all charred up because they both died. Maybe they've got their hands around each other's necks. They're both dead, and around them you see the anarchy of the city because now you have upended everything. Or if you wanted a sequel, you could always have some other superhero show up and be like, finally, that fucker killed him. And you find out that this other superhero has in some way been causing you to believe everything was wrong just so he could take out the number one.
Yeah, been watching things from the background, manipulating everything.
Can you imagine that shit? Maybe he helped you and you thought he was just siding with you because you proved to him that the main bad guy but he was like number 2, he was like the Deep. Or he was like somebody in the 7, and you kill him.
Number 2, he's the 7th, surely.
Yeah, and he's just like, I'm really happy you killed him, or whatever. Now I can rule. It all depends on the obscure death rule and how you want to do a sequel.
It's like Brightburn, isn't it? I mean, I absolutely love the way they finished that. His mum finds out. She figures out that the metal from the ship is the only thing that can hurt him.
Yeah.
And he clicks with that, and then he just skyrockets into the sky and just drops her. And that's it. Imagine that as
and then he fakes everything at the end.
Fakes the plane crash to cover it up.
Which is exactly what happens in The Boys, too. And The Boys was written prior to Brightburn, which surprises me that they both are so... there's a lot of similarities.
Oh, I said it's almost the prequel, Brightburn. That's the way it feels.
Really, it can feel that way, for sure.
The tone is a bit different because The Boys is way more playful and funny at times, whereas Brightburn just isn't. But it definitely feels like the bloody prequel almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. Did they ever... Did we get a hint if Brightburn will see a sequel?
I haven't read anything yet, but I think it's done relatively well. So, I mean, there's a lot of places they could take it, but yeah, I think there will be. I've got a feeling there will be.
I just think we're at this time where we, like... it would be so cool if somebody said, "Here, brand new consoles are here. Here's an Evils." I don't know.
Man, yeah.
I just feel like we're at this point where, Joker.
Film and TV
Joker
are doing this. Yeah, the new Joker film. Yeah. And they are starting to there's a Mobius film, the vampire that's coming out.
Yeah,
that's Jared Leto again, though. So yeah.
True.
But we are starting to see some character like Lucifer on TV, obviously.
Yeah.
But again, they use comedy to kind of offset the fact that they're playing.
And it's
evil
Lucifer.
Characters.
He already turned good, or not good, but what I mean. It's like it didn't take long. I mean, the true idea here is, can you stay evil through an entire game? I mean, that's exactly. I think even we've had that as we've discussed, it had that difficulty of how do you I personally feel that the best ending, if you wanted to stay evil, was that you kill him. It shows the rubble. You've smashed that last superhero, and it just shows you adding, him to your case, your Hall of Infamy, and maybe you walk away and say, now it's time to really get started, or whatever, and you're just like, fuck.
Yeah.
There's no... there's no happy-go-lucky baby petting, dog petting, baby coddling moment. It's just like, we've just now begun to fuck this place up, and I'm gonna run everything. It just all depends. It depends the tact and the fucking like you said, the way you write it, jokey versus,
If you're gonna maintain, say, a 25, 30-hour minimum story. Say the core story is 15 hours, whatever.
Right.
You're going to have to maintain the player's interest in wanting to be morally unjust for that amount of time. So you've got to be able to justify it to the player.
Right.
Because a lot of people just won't be able to handle that.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to have that morally good choice.
We hear it, right, in our own Discord. In our own Discord, I'll say, I played him evil as fuck. And somebody will be like, I just can't do it. I just can't. They'll be like, I just can't. So I do see the distaste so I guess it does matter. Like, who do you aim for? Personally, I aim for fuck distaste. I aim for he's evil, deal, or don't get it.
Yeah, The Boys, exactly. They just did it.
Yeah.
No worries about what the audience is going to think. And look at what people think of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because when we were talking, I was just like, yeah, you could do it. And you can. But I do think that, like you said, there's not only is there a bunch of difficulties ignoring the studio stuff, there's how do you make somebody even, because I mean, a homicidal game people will want to play. People played Manhunt, right?
Yeah.
But that contingent is a lot lower, I bet, in total people than at least somebody who'd buy in if there was a morally ambiguous reason why the person continued.
Yeah. And I think if you give them that reason, you then justify being that in the game. If you don't do that, as you said, how many people do we know that just want to play the good version, or they just wouldn't sit right with them?
And then how do you stop that in the game? Let's talk about that for a second. How do you keep let's say a player tries to do or doesn't do anything in the game. So you get the game and you have a player who is morally so flummoxed by the choices we've made developing this supervillain game that they don't want to make any choice. What do you do with them? But they still want to play the game. Personally, I would say, and this is just me, you just make it hard as fuck. You just you don't get any of the bonuses. Like if you're not, I mean, I don't know any other way to do it. How would you do it?
Like Vampire, if you don't drink enough blood, you don't get stronger. So
sure,
in that way. So
you could do that. I think it would just be vastly more difficult.
Just be much harder. And what we've already talked about is the timed missions.
True.
So if you don't do any of them, so at least then with that time, that might then force the player to say, okay, I need to go and do one of these things. But yeah, that is a problem.
I think that's the difficulty with the games we're playing now, is that they say they're open world, but they're only open world until you get to the pivotal moment, and then they're as closed off as you could fucking be.
Yeah.
And
they get locked into their little walled situations.
Yeah, you can't let this fucking Fisk go, right? I think with an evil superhero game you could, and that's why I'm interested in it. I'm interested in showing up, no one's around, right? You show up and you're like, Fisk, I'm gonna fuck you up, or you're like, Fisk, I'm gonna pretend to fuck you up, but you work for me now. And to me, there's something absolutely just exciting about that. There's something exciting about those kind of things.
Imagine if you let's forget the superhero thing for a minute, in terms of you being a superhero supervillain. Imagine you're just an assassin, say like Assassin's Creed style, and you establish these situations where you contain a superhero, like the Batman v Superman thing, where you set stuff up, and then you've got a knife to their throat, like Whisk in his office. You have a knife to his throat, and you have that animation in Assassin's Creed where you're about to kill them, but you make the choice: join me, don't join me.
Right.
Something like that. That would work.
Well, I actually have in my notes here, could one of the gameplay elements being learning about the heroes and setting traps for them due to their weaknesses? So certain heroes, that they have a certain thing that you might be able to trap, and then what do you get to choose? For every character, you get to have that choice. And like you said, it would be better as an action, not a narrative.
Yeah,
the narrative is there that you absolutely are winner, right? You're winner. Whatever happens at the end of that boss battle, that your character has won. And then, like you said, you have a moment of choice. Do you let, X to let him go, or A to, punch a hole through their spine? And both will offer something.
Yeah, and affect the world in different ways, and the way that then the world, is interacting back with you again. That's the crux of stuff like this.
I think when I look at a lot of games that are open world, I still see some pretty good writing. Everybody'd say Chris Avellone or whatever. Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. He's a good writer. But there's also other, for example, you had nothing to do with Vampire, and I felt Vampire did a really good job with some of this in its writing. I think like you said, even though we don't want to admit it, like David Cage did a pretty good job with Detroit.
He did with Detroit, yeah, definitely did.
So you just need, I think with Detroit, he had an editor, right? Isn't that what we found out? So he had somebody who's like...
He had more editors than he'd ever had before in a game, and I think that just made it... It's a bit like, we talked about it before, George Lucas.
Right.
George Lucas, up until Jedi, he had a producer called Gary Kurtz who would say, no, that's stupid, Lucas. And he would refrain a little bit. But Kurtz went for Jedi, and then we get puppets and Ewoks. I mean, same principle. So with Cage, you had those people around him who were like, just no.
Where did Kurtz go? Did he quit? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think he just left, yeah. I'm not sure whether he went off and did another project or something else, but he helped produce the first two films.
Oh, and then he was done.
Yeah.
Has he ever talked about this afterwards? Do you know?
Not that he probably has, but I haven't read it.
Okay.
So it's probably
and if he did, we'd probably, if he had made a stink about it, we would have heard by, there would have been some.
If it was some massive, huge thing, yeah. I think he'd probably just produced another film or two.
Oh, gotcha. What else do we have to talk about for this? How long have we been going? Hour?
2 hours.
Holy shit! What? Really?
Yeah, we start at 7:00. It's now 9 p.m. in my land.
Oh damn. Okay. What else do we have to add before we? Jesus, really? That's crazy. What else do we have to add before we finish this up?
Well,
Motives,
how would you go?
Hours?
Well, yeah. We talked about like origins. We talked about the dichotomies that you could have. How you would use action rather than narrative choices, so a narrative pushed forward that way. How would you feel about kind of the soundscape, the music, the voice
it's funny
acting?
You mentioned that. About halfway through this, I was getting ready to mention music, and I was like, "Is that going to really work?"
Well, this is why I want to bring it up. It's like,
personally, I feel the best way to do it would be to have it tied into the morality. That's just me. It'd probably be too hard. I would love to have it hook, and the more evil you got, maybe the more discordant shit got, and the more almost horror movie vibe.
Like Alien Isolation, where the closer the alien is, the more discordant.
You could do some crazy shit. You could have a theme for yourself and all that kind of. I think that would work really well. I just don't know what they can get away with behind the scenes for like how much leeway they have, because I know a lot of companies don't want to have hugely differing soundtracks depending on how you play, because to sell the OST, the official soundtrack, you actually have to solidify the track. And Austin Wintory described that in the interview I did with him, where he's like, the songs that are on the OST are different than Assassin's Creed Syndicate songs, because Syndicate songs are dynamic. So he has to go
and
in
they
say,
roll, change, and
yeah,
alter
he has
on the
to
fly,
say this is the way the OST is. And I think some companies don't want to diverge heavily, because then you have to have a good version and a bad version, like Black and White, right? You have like your good guy version of the OST. But I think ignoring selling of an OST, just overall, that would be hit and miss too, because some people just may not like, they may really like one element of it. Maybe your instrument choice is really good for the bad choices that you make, discordant violins, all that kind of stuff, throbbing music like a horror movie. I personally feel a horror superhero soundtrack would be incredible. Like,
oh man, you could do so much cool stuff.
yeah,
with it.
almost like the Imperial March, that dun 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 dun. You have like that imperialness, all that kind of stuff. And then with your good guy, then you have to go, well, he's not fully good, so how do we do this? Like, how do we?
Yeah.
How do we? Is it just slight? Is it like diet horror? And that becomes an issue, right? Trying to sell that. It would take a really good. I mean, it would take a really good artist to understand how to put those hooks in and make sure it was dynamic. But yeah,
making that dynamic tone shift when it happened, and you were doing that reprehensible stuff in the game. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, see, this is where I want stuff that just can't, well, or at least we've never heard of. I would love it so that the more evil you were, if you used your electricity spell, it sounded worse and worse. Like, I'm that kind of thinker, where I'm like, what if I hadn't done a bunch of bad shit and my morality was pretty high? I use a lightning and it's like crackling lightning like you normally hear. But then what if...
It comes like the Emperor, like screaming and laughing while
if
he's
I'm a
doing
bad
it.
guy, do I scream and laugh, and does it come with a sonic boom? Is it like, and then if you're the good guys, like, I'm of that kind of thought process, and I think it's possible, but I also think it's probably really hard. That's a good question. I'm going to have to ask. I talk to Elijah Chuck occasionally, the guy from Dead Rising 4. The soundtrack guy, and he, despite what people think of Dead Rising 4, I enjoyed it, and musically I actually really liked it, and so I've had him on the podcast twice, and he usually can answer that. I'll have to ask him and see, or him or Austin.
Just how you would approach it.
Just be like,
it's very different.
Is it even like what resource feasible? I guess would be the question. How, and if you wanted to do it with all powers, because imagine a fiery power for a good guy would just be like crackling of a forest fire magnified. But then, that evil, like, how do you do it? And then graphically, would it change? If like.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, electricity, you could go from the bluest blue to purple.
Purple and red, like something directly out of, Empire Strikes, or the Star Wars movie. Yeah, no, it'd be fun. I mean, that kind of stuff to me is super exciting, and in fact, I think would sell it more than anything. If you can, if you could
nail that stuff. Oh man,
Black Lightning. Did you ever see that TV show?
Yeah, we talked about it. Not
horrendous.
all of it, most of it, but yeah, I did.
Did his lightning sound? Do you even remember? Because I don't even remember what it sounded like.
No, I don't.
I'd have to go check. God, that show was bad. Is it still going?
I haven't heard of any other seasons. It might have gone to a season 2, but
gotcha.
No.
There's so many shows on, right? That's another thing. Last night I was talking
about
I
can barely keep up.
Dude, we were talking about shows last night, and then I was just like, if I hadn't heard of this one show, I wouldn't have seen it. Like Absentia or whatever, the one with
Absentia.
Stanya Karak. I wouldn't even have heard of that if I hadn't watched The Boys, because it played as an advertisement.
Oh, right, on Prime.
And I knew about it, as in I had heard about it, but it wouldn't have, and it would have probably been a year or two before I would have randomly been like, hey, what's she up to? Watching watching Castle.
Yeah.
But anybody who watching, I'd like to know what you guys think on this. You can Twitter me. A lot of people answer on Twitter what they think of this kind of stuff. I appreciate everybody listening, because it's, to me, honestly, I feel that there's very few parts in games that I feel like we're lean on, and I truly believe that this is one place in games that I honestly feel like there's a gap, and that it would be...
Absolutely, man. Games dance around this, but not barely any, if any, actually do it. They dance around the moral ambiguity stuff. They dance around a bit of a morality compass change. But that's kind of it. They skirt around the subject without actually getting into it.
And they're all
interesting how many people really want this type of game as well.
Oh, true. Yeah, if you don't want the game, I'd like to hear that.
I bet there are a ton of people though. I bet you loads of people responded like, "Yeah, we really, really think this could be cool."
I think also the games, because I know a lot of people are like, "Well, Prototype was made in Infamous." They were, but they were a sign of their times, and there was always hinging back around towards like. It wasn't even just a reason to be a bad guy, but it was usually there was always something about him that felt like binary, especially Infamous in particular.
Infamous, hugely
just
binary.
Did not feel like it was, and I want the more, even from what we've talked about here, I want a more gray area. I like the question. I want a player even to go, fuck, man, was that really what I should have done? Like, even as a bad guy, even a person playing a bad guy, did you go too bad? Did it not go bad enough? Were you like, dude, I would have nuked the city. Like, I'd like somebody to investigate that. And Prototype and Infamous were out when anti-hero movies and games were out. I'm talking more now, where the Joker's got his own, where Suicide Squad, that was sort of a B-level superheroes turned bad kind of thing. But the Joker is
more
coming.
Anti-heroes.
Yeah, the Joker's coming. The Boys is here. Umbrella Company is questionable. Academy is questionable if it fits this, but we're at a time where I think right now it could work.
I do. And I think this is primed for it, man. It's primed for it. All the big franchises, all the Avengers, all the DC stuff have been skirting around this for ages and making it more and more prominent.
Well, we're getting
the Boys now comes along and goes, hey, Loki TV show,
and they've made it clear that is when in his homicidal phase, not during the later movies where he sacrifices himself. They were like, no, this Loki is the one who wants to rule the world and will kill people just like he did in the first Avengers movie, where he just kills that old guy. Yeah, because he's
from that separate timeline that kicks off before the Infinity War and stuff.
Yep.
And Doctor Strange is supposed to be a full-on horror.
That's a full-on horror one, yeah. And there was was one more that seemed like it was going to be slightly.
Well, Blade should be interesting.
Blade will be interesting.
I mean, he's always been the hard R-rated,
Somebody
Marvel
told me that when
superhero.
they looked that up, it said Blade was the only one not going to be connected. Did you see that?
I didn't, but it makes sense because how would you introduce that character to vampires in particular? But how would you also like match the tone?
Right.
People want an R-rated superhero movie and not just Deadpool, so Blade is the one you could do.
Yeah, that actor who's going to play that character is
Mahershala Ali.
Yeah. 4400, I saw him in. I've seen him in a couple things. I think he's a really good actor. I can't wait.
He's brilliant, man. Double Oscar winner.
I think to replace Wesley Snipes, he might be the only one. Like, when they showed him, I'm like, damn, even his head shape is the same. Like,
oh, yeah.
He is a legit... Not facially, you wouldn't confuse them at all, but like just shape and body wise,
tone, seriousness of the all that stuff.
That's good casting. If you're not going to go Wesley Snipes, which would have been hard because he's older. I mean, he's in good shape and everything, but
I hope
he's hard to work
cameos
with.
in it. I really hope he's a cameo.
What if there's like two Blades? What if like he's the old Blade and because remember he was already aging out in the third one and they were having issues and all this. What if like they do that where they're all what if he runs the shop that sells?
He's like Whistler now,
yeah, or like Whistler, that would be it. Would unfortunately, hopefully he's not still hell behind the scenes like we've heard it occurred in number 3 where other actors didn't want to work. I think time in prison might have fixed that. Who knows?
Yeah, well,
right. Sometimes
you bloody think so.
Yeah, you would think somebody'd learn some fucking like courtesy, but maybe not.
Wesley Snipes, go and sit in the corner and think about what you've done.
Yeah, think about what you've done, Wesley. Damn it, you stopped us from getting Blade 4 and 5.
Blade 4, damn it, yeah.
I think that's it for us. I want to thank Sleeve for showing up again. That is the Last Edit Pod. At The Last Edit Pod on Twitter. You can go there and you can get the YouTube address. I'll put it in the description here. At Jeremy Penter is where you can respond and you can say what you think of this. If you agree, disagree, what you want to see. We'll certainly be covering this in the podcast on the International. I'm sure I'll somehow bring it up because we've all seen The Boys, and I think everybody, or at least the 2 or 3 people I know on the podcast have seen it and like it. But I want to thank Sleeve again. You guys will see more guests coming on here. Yeah, it was a blast to do. If you get a chance, go to Patreon, become a patron. I would absolutely appreciate it. Or subscribe here, which is free. and you always get informed of new podcasts that are going up. If you see this
we
live
have the
on
best Discord in the land.
we
That's
do.
what we have.
We do. And if you get a chance, this might be up on YouTube. Give it a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. I don't know if I'll upload it. I'm going to check. Anyway, that's it for us. Thank you very much for watching. Peace out.